Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. On the morning of March 15, 2019, the Phoenix Metro SWAT team received what appeared to be a routine, high-risk warrant execution request. The target, a suspected drug manufacturing operation housed within a residential compound in the affluent Riverside Hills neighborhood, approximately 23 miles northeast of downtown Phoenix. What began as a standard dawn raid would evolve into one of the most disturbing incidents in modern tactical law enforcement history. An operation that would fundamentally change how SWAT teams across the nation approach intelligence gathering and psychological preparation for extreme criminal encounters. The morning briefing took place at 0400 hours in the Tactical Operations Center at Phoenix Metro headquarters. A sterile conference room lined with tactical maps, surveillance photographs, and communications equipment. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across the faces of SWAT Team Alpha as they reviewed their mission parameters for what appeared to be their 47th high-risk warrant execution of the year. Commander Michael Richardson, a broad-shouldered man with graying temples and 15 years of tactical experience, stood before a large projection screen displaying aerial photographs of their target location. SWAT Team Alpha had been operational together for 5 years and 2 months, having executed over 200 similar operations during their tenure as Phoenix Metro's primary tactical response unit. The team consisted of 8 highly trained specialists, each with specialized skills that had been honed through countless hours of training and real-world operations that had taken them into some of Phoenix's most dangerous criminal environments. Commander Richardson himself brought extensive military background to the team, having served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army Rangers before transitioning to civilian law enforcement. His tactical philosophy emphasized thorough preparation, clear communication, and adaptability under pressure, principles that had served the team well during operations ranging from armed robbery suspects to complex drug cartel compounds. Richardson's leadership style was methodical and calm, earning him the respect of both his subordinates and department administrators who relied on Alpha Team for the most challenging tactical operations. Sergeant Amanda Foster served as the team's tactical coordinator and explosives expert, a compact woman with intense dark eyes and an uncanny ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Foster had joined Phoenix Metro after 8 years with the FBI's hostage rescue team, bringing specialized training in explosive ordnance disposal and tactical breaching techniques. Her expertise had proven invaluable during operations involving fortified drug houses and barricaded suspects, and her meticulous attention to detail had prevented numerous potential disasters during complex tactical operations. Officer Christopher Martinez functioned as the team's primary breacher, a role that required both physical strength and precise technical knowledge of various entry techniques. Martinez, a former Marine with extensive combat experience in Iraq, had developed specialized techniques for rapid entry into fortified structures while minimizing risk to team members and potential hostages. His imposing physical presence, standing 6'4" and weighing 240 pounds, was complemented by a surprisingly gentle demeanor that had proven effective during hostage negotiations and community outreach programs. Officer Daniel Chen served as the designated marksman, a position requiring exceptional marksmanship skills and the ability to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. Chen had been recruited from the Marines' Elite Scout Sniper program, where he had earned decorations for exceptional performance during multiple combat deployments. His precision shooting abilities had been crucial during several hostage situations, and his calm, analytical approach to threat assessment made him an invaluable asset during complex tactical operations where precision fire might be required to protect innocent lives. Officer Jessica Thompson handled communications coordination, managing the complex web of radio traffic, intelligence updates, and interagency coordination that characterized modern tactical operations. Thompson had developed specialized expertise in electronic surveillance and signal intelligence, skills that had proven crucial during operations involving sophisticated criminal organizations with advanced communication security measures. Her ability to maintain clear communication channels while simultaneously monitoring multiple intelligence sources had prevented several operations from developing into prolonged standoffs or worse. Officer Robert Hayes provided medical support, a critical role given the high-risk nature of tactical operations and the potential for both team members and suspects to require immediate medical attention. Hayes had served as a Navy corpsman before transitioning to civilian emergency medical services, eventually specializing in tactical medicine, specifically designed for law enforcement operations. His medical expertise had saved lives during multiple operations, and his knowledge of trauma medicine had proven invaluable during investigations involving serious criminal violence. Officer Ashley Parker functioned as the team's intelligence analyst, responsible for gathering, analyzing, and disseminating the intelligence information that formed the foundation of successful tactical operations. Parker had developed expertise in digital forensics and criminal intelligence analysis after completing specialized training with the Drug Enforcement Administration. Her analytical skills had been crucial in identifying patterns of criminal behavior and predicting suspect responses during tactical operations, making her insights essential for operational planning and risk assessment. Officer David Morgan represented the newest addition to Alpha Team, having joined just 8 months prior after completing specialized tactical training and demonstrating exceptional performance during probationary operations. Morgan brought advanced training in urban warfare and close-quarters combat, skills developed during multiple deployments with the Army's Special Forces. Despite his relatively recent addition to the team, Morgan had quickly earned the respect of his colleagues through his professionalism, tactical competence, and ability to remain calm under pressure during high-stress operations. The intelligence package for the Riverside operation had been developed over 6 weeks through a collaborative effort between the Drug Enforcement Administration and Phoenix PD's Narcotics Division. The investigation had begun following a routine traffic stop in downtown Phoenix, during which officers had discovered a significant quantity of high-purity methamphetamine, along with sophisticated packaging materials and distribution lists suggesting connections to a large-scale manufacturing and distribution network operating throughout the Southwest region. DEA Special Agent William Torres, a veteran investigator with 12 years of experience targeting major drug trafficking organizations, had been assigned as the lead federal coordinator for the investigation. Torres had built his reputation through successful operations against sophisticated criminal organizations, including several major cartel operations that had resulted in significant disruptions to regional drug trafficking networks. His methodical approach to intelligence gathering and his extensive network of confidential informants had made him one of the DEA's most effective agents in the Southwest region. The investigation had initially focused on traditional, street-level dealers and mid-level distributors, following the typical pattern of working upward through criminal hierarchies to identify major suppliers and manufacturing operations. However, surveillance and intelligence gathering had revealed connections to an operation far more sophisticated than typical drug manufacturing facilities. Rather than the expected network of small-scale producers operating from residential locations, investigators had discovered evidence pointing toward a centralized, highly secure facility with professional-grade security measures and operational protocols. Surveillance of the Riverside Hills compound had begun 4 weeks prior to the planned tactical operation, utilizing a combination of physical observation, electronic monitoring, and aerial reconnaissance. The target location at 4847 Riverside Drive presented immediate challenges for traditional surveillance techniques due to its isolated location, extensive security measures, and the paranoid operational security demonstrated by the compound's occupants. The property itself consisted of a sprawling, single-story ranch home, constructed in the southwestern architectural style, situated on 3 acres of carefully landscaped grounds that had been designed to provide clear sight lines in all directions, while simultaneously offering numerous concealment opportunities for defensive positions. The main residence, built in the 1990s as a luxury private home, had been extensively modified since its acquisition by Marcus Sullivan 3 years prior, with additions including reinforced exterior doors, bulletproof glass in several windows, and a sophisticated electronic security system with motion sensors and closed-circuit television coverage. Marcus Sullivan, the compound's owner and the primary target of the investigation, presented an unusual profile for a major drug trafficking suspect. The 42-year-old businessman had no prior criminal record and maintained a legitimate business profile as the owner of several medical equipment supply companies operating throughout Arizona and New Mexico. Sullivan's background included a medical degree from the University of Arizona and several years of practice as an emergency room physician before transitioning to business ownership in the medical supply industry. What made Sullivan particularly concerning to investigators was intelligence suggesting he had recruited former military personnel to provide security for his operation, individuals with specialized training in combat tactics, explosives, and sophisticated weapons systems. Intercepted communications had referenced the presence of automatic weapons, improvised explosive devices, and what appeared to be a comprehensive early warning system designed to detect law enforcement surveillance and prevent successful tactical operations against the compound. The compound's remote location presented significant tactical challenges for any potential law enforcement operation. Situated at the end of a private road nearly a mile from the nearest public roadway, the property was surrounded by high adobe walls topped with razor wire and monitored by an extensive camera system that provided 360-degree coverage of all approaches. The main residence was positioned centrally on the property, with clear fields of fire in all directions, while 2 smaller outbuildings provided additional defensive positions and potential staging areas for armed resistance. Intelligence analysis had identified the 2 outbuildings as critical components of Sullivan's operation. The larger structure, described in property records as a workshop, was believed to house the primary methamphetamine production facility based on thermal imaging that revealed consistent heat signatures and ventilation patterns consistent with chemical processing operations. The smaller building, officially described as a guest house, appeared to serve as living quarters for Sullivan's security personnel, with surveillance indicating the regular presence of at least 4 individuals who maintained military-style routine and discipline. The tactical planning process for the Riverside operation had consumed nearly 2 weeks of intensive preparation, with Commander Richardson and his team analyzing every aspect of the compound's layout, security measures, and potential defensive capabilities. The planning process included consultation with explosive ordnance disposal specialists, tactical aviation units, and intelligence analysts who had studied Sullivan's background and potential psychological profile to predict his likely responses to law enforcement action. Richardson's tactical plan called for a simultaneous multi-point assault designed to overwhelm the compound's defensive capabilities and prevent organized resistance from Sullivan's security personnel. The operation would commence with electronic warfare measures to disable the compound's communication systems and security cameras, followed immediately by coordinated breaches of all three major structures using specialized explosive charges and mechanical breaching equipment. Alpha Team would be responsible for securing the main residence, with Richardson leading the assault through the front entrance while Foster coordinated breaching operations and explosive ordnance disposal. Martinez would handle primary breaching duties using both mechanical and explosive techniques as required by the specific defensive measures encountered. Chen would provide overwatch and precision fire support from an elevated position on the property's eastern perimeter, with clear sight lines to all major structures and potential defensive positions. Bravo Team, led by Sergeant Kenneth Walsh, would simultaneously assault the outbuildings, with primary responsibility for securing what intelligence believed to be the main production facility and the security personnel quarters. Walsh brought extensive tactical experience from operations throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area, including several successful raids on cartel-operated facilities that had involved sophisticated defensive measures and heavily armed resistance. Air support would be provided by Phoenix PD's helicopter unit, equipped with thermal imaging, communications relay equipment, and tactical spotlights for illuminating the operational area during the pre-dawn assault. The helicopter crew would also provide real-time intelligence updates regarding suspect movement within the compound and coordinate with ground units to prevent any attempts at escape through the property's extensive wooded areas. Perimeter containment would be maintained by patrol officers from 3 surrounding precincts, with additional support from the Arizona Department of Public Safety and federal agents from both the DEA and FBI. The perimeter units would be positioned to intercept any suspects attempting to flee the compound, while also providing backup support for the tactical teams if the operation developed into a prolonged engagement or hostage situation. The evening of March 14th found Commander Richardson in his office, reviewing aerial photographs and building schematics for what he hoped would be the final time before the operation commenced. The compound's layout continued to present tactical concerns, particularly the extensive sight lines that would allow defenders to engage approaching tactical teams from multiple concealed positions. The property's isolation also meant that backup support would require several minutes to reach the tactical teams if the operation encountered unexpected complications or fierce resistance. Richardson's experience with similar operations had taught him that the most dangerous moments occurred when intelligence predictions failed to match operational realities. Drug trafficking organizations had become increasingly sophisticated in their defensive preparations, often employing former military or law enforcement personnel who understood tactical procedures and could anticipate law enforcement responses. The possibility that Sullivan's security team included individuals with specialized combat training meant that Alpha Team needed to be prepared for resistance far beyond what they typically encountered during routine warrant executions. The intelligence briefing conducted at 2300 hours on March 14th included final updates from surveillance teams who had maintained observation of the compound throughout the day. Activity levels within the compound had remained consistent with established patterns, with thermal imaging confirming the presence of approximately 6 individuals distributed between the main residence and the outbuildings. No unusual defensive preparations had been observed, and electronic monitoring had detected no communication suggesting awareness of the impending law enforcement operation. Officer Parker's final intelligence assessment, delivered to the assembled tactical teams during the late-night briefing, indicated no significant changes to the target profile or threat assessment. Surveillance had confirmed the locations of security cameras and motion sensors, while electronic intelligence had identified the compound's communication frequencies and encryption protocols. The compound's electronic security systems appeared sophisticated, but not beyond the capabilities of Phoenix Metro's electronic warfare specialists to disable or disrupt. Weather conditions for the morning of March 15th were optimal for tactical operations, with clear skies, minimal wind, and temperatures in the mid-50s that would provide comfortable working conditions for tactical personnel while not affecting the operation of sensitive electronic equipment. Sunrise was scheduled for 6:47 hours, meaning the tactical teams would have approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes of darkness for their approach and initial assault phases. As Alpha Team conducted their final equipment checks in the pre-dawn darkness of March 15th, the atmosphere was professional and confident. Each team member had participated in similar operations dozens of times, and their equipment reflected the culmination of decades of tactical development and real-world experience. Body armor, communications equipment, weapons systems, and specialized breaching tools had all been tested and proven during previous operations against sophisticated criminal organizations. Officer Martinez performed final checks on his breaching equipment, including both mechanical tools and explosive charges that might be required if the compound's defensive modifications proved more extensive than intelligence had indicated. His tools included hydraulic door spreaders, diamond blade cutting saws, and specialized shaped charges designed to defeat reinforced barriers while minimizing risk to personnel on both sides of breached entrances. Sergeant Foster conducted final inspections of her explosive ordnance disposal equipment and communication devices that would allow coordination between tactical teams and support units throughout the operation. Her equipment included portable X-ray systems for identifying potential booby traps, remote-controlled explosive disposal robots, and specialized protective gear designed to allow safe investigation of suspected, improvised explosive devices. Officer Chen verified the calibration and function of his precision rifle systems, including both primary and backup weapons equipped with advanced optical sights and ballistic computers that would allow accurate engagement of targets at extended ranges if the tactical situation required precision fire to protect team members or innocent parties. His position would provide overwatch of the entire compound and allow immediate response to threats that might not be visible to ground-based tactical teams. At 05:15 hours, both Alpha and Bravo teams moved into their final assault positions, using the property's extensive landscaping and natural terrain features for concealment during their approach to the compound's perimeter walls. The approach phase proceeded without incident, with thermal imaging from the helicopter confirming that the compound's occupants remained unaware of the law enforcement presence surrounding their facility. Richardson's Alpha team approached the main residence from the north, utilizing a drainage ditch and ornamental shrubs to maintain concealment until the final moments before the assault commenced. The compound appeared quiet and peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness, with only minimal lighting visible from the main structure's windows and no indication of unusual activity or heightened security awareness among the occupants. Thermal imaging from the helicopter continued to show approximately 6 heat signatures distributed throughout the compound's 3 major structures, with 3 individuals apparently sleeping in the main residence, 2 in the guest house, and 1 moving around what appeared to be the workshop area. The distribution of personnel matched intelligence predictions and suggested that Sullivan's security measures were operating on normal routines rather than heightened alert status. Officer Chen moved into his overwatch position near the property's eastern wall, a location that provided clear sight lines to all 3 major structures and the potential defensive positions that intelligence analysis had identified as most likely to be utilized if the compound's occupants chose to resist the law enforcement operation. His position included natural concealment from ornamental rocks and desert vegetation while offering stable firing positions and clear communications with other team members. As the countdown to the assault reached its final minutes, all communications remained clear and all personnel reported ready status. Electronic warfare measures were prepared to disable the compound's security systems at the moment the assault commenced. while tactical teams verified their final positioning and prepared for immediate dynamic entry into all target structures simultaneously. At 05:29 hours and 30 seconds, Officer Thompson initiated the final countdown sequence that would coordinate the assault timing between Alpha Team, Bravo Team, Air Support, and Electronic Warfare Specialists. All units, prepare for assault commencement in 60 seconds. Electronic Warfare, stand by for system disruption on my mark. Overwatch, confirm clear fields of fire and target acquisition. Richardson raised his hand, signaling Alpha Team's readiness for the assault. Martinez positioned himself directly in front of the main residence's reinforced front entrance, battering ram ready for the initial breach attempt. Foster prepared flashbang grenades for immediate deployment upon successful entry, while other team members took their assigned positions for rapid room clearing and suspect control once access to the structure was achieved. At exactly 5:30 hours, Martinez struck the compound's front door with tremendous force, expecting the barrier to fail and allow immediate entry into the main residence. However, the reinforced steel door barely moved despite the impact, indicating defensive modifications far more extensive than intelligence had suggested. A second attempt with additional force produced similar results, causing Martinez to immediately signal for explosive breaching assistance. "Commander, we have a problem," Martinez reported through the team's communication system. "This door has been reinforced beyond our initial assessments. I'm going to need shaped charges to achieve breach." The unexpected resistance indicated that Sullivan's defensive preparations were more sophisticated than surveillance had revealed, immediately elevating the tactical risk level and suggesting that other aspects of the compound might also present unexpected challenges. As Foster moved forward with shaped charges designed to defeat reinforced barriers, Officer Chen's voice crackled through the team's communications with intelligence that dramatically altered their understanding of the tactical situation. "Commander, thermal imaging is showing rapid movement throughout the compound. Multiple heat signatures are moving toward what appears to be a lower level beneath the main residence. Be advised, we may be dealing with basement or subsurface facilities not indicated in our building schematics." This intelligence was deeply troubling, as architectural plans and building permits had indicated no basement level within the main residence. The possibility of unknown subsurface facilities meant that suspect count, defensive capabilities, and escape routes were all potentially far more complex than tactical planning had anticipated. Richardson made the immediate decision to proceed with explosive breaching while requesting updated thermal imaging and intelligence assessment from helicopter support. Foster's shaped charges detonated at precisely 05:32 hours and 17 seconds, successfully destroying the reinforced front entrance and creating a breach point that would allow Alpha Team entry into the main residence. The explosion was significantly larger than anticipated, indicating that the door's reinforcement had included additional steel plating and possibly ballistic-resistant materials that required more explosive force to defeat than standard residential construction. However, what Alpha Team discovered immediately upon entry through the breached doorway defied all their expectations, training, and previous operational experience. Instead of the residential interior layout typical of single-family homes, or even the defensive modifications common to drug manufacturing facilities, the team found themselves in what appeared to be a sophisticated medical facility complete with examination tables, surgical equipment, and extensive pharmaceutical storage systems. The entrance area opened directly into a reception space that resembled a hospital emergency department more than a residential living room. The walls were lined with medical monitors displaying what appeared to be real-time vital signs and medical data, while the air carried the distinct antiseptic smell of medical facilities combined with something else that Officer Thompson would later describe as metallic and wrong, like blood and fear mixed together. Richardson immediately radioed for additional intelligence support while directing his team to begin systematic clearing of the structure according to modified tactics appropriate for the unexpected facility layout they had encountered. Each room revealed increasingly disturbing evidence that challenged their understanding of what Sullivan's operation actually involved and what criminal activities had been conducted within the compound. The first examination room contained medical equipment that appeared legitimate, but was arranged in configurations that seemed designed for restraint rather than treatment. Examination tables were equipped with heavy-duty restraint systems far beyond what would be required for normal medical procedures, while IV stands and monitoring equipment suggested capabilities for long-term patient control rather than routine medical care. Officer Hayes, drawing upon his extensive medical training and experience with both military and civilian trauma medicine, immediately recognized that the pharmaceutical storage systems contained compounds far more sophisticated and dangerous than anything associated with methamphetamine production. Rather than the precursor chemicals and basic laboratory equipment expected based on DEA intelligence, the storage areas contained powerful anesthetics, paralytic agents, and experimental compounds that Hayes couldn't immediately identify but recognized as potentially lethal in the wrong hands. Many of the stored pharmaceuticals bore labels from legitimate medical supply companies and major pharmaceutical manufacturers, but were marked with batch numbers that Hayes later learned had been reported stolen from various medical facilities, research institutions, and pharmaceutical distribution centers across the Southwest region. The quantity and variety of controlled substances suggested operations far more complex and dangerous than traditional drug manufacturing. As Alpha Team continued their systematic sweep of the main residence's upper level, each successive room revealed evidence of activities that appeared to combine sophisticated medical knowledge with criminal intent in ways that challenged the team's understanding of criminal behavior. Surgical instruments were arranged with military-like precision, while computer systems displayed databases containing detailed medical information about numerous individuals whose photographs and personal data suggested they were unlikely to have been voluntary patients. Meanwhile, Bravo Team was reporting their own deeply disturbing discoveries from the compound's outbuildings. Sergeant Walsh's voice came through the communication system with barely controlled tension as he described what his team had found in the workshop structure. Command: be advised that the workshop contains what appears to be a fully equipped surgical theater. We have multiple examination tables with restraint systems, surgical lighting, anesthesia equipment, and what looks like broadcast equipment for recording procedures. The guest house revealed evidence of long-term habitation, but not by the expected security personnel. Instead, Bravo Team found living quarters that appeared designed for medical staff, complete with surgical scrubs bearing name tags from various hospitals and medical facilities, medical textbooks covering subjects from anesthesiology to experimental surgery, and detailed schedules for what were euphemistically referred to as research sessions and subject evaluations. Personal belongings found throughout the guest house suggested the recent presence of at least 4 individuals with medical training, including prescription pads, medical licenses, and correspondence with legitimate medical institutions. However, the combination of this apparently legitimate medical credentials with the disturbing evidence found throughout the compound suggested that Sullivan had recruited licensed medical professionals to participate in whatever criminal activities were being conducted at the facility. At 05:45 hours, Officer Chen reported visual contact with an individual moving between trees in the wooded area at the property's northeastern perimeter. The figure appeared to be wearing medical scrubs and was carrying what looked like a medical bag while moving quickly through the forest in an apparent attempt to escape the compound without being detected by law enforcement personnel. When Chen challenged the individual to surrender and identify themselves, the person immediately fled deeper into the wooded area, abandoning the medical bag and disappearing into the dense vegetation that bordered the property. Richardson immediately dispatched Officers Morgan and Parker in pursuit, while maintaining the primary team's focus on securing the compound's main structures and investigating the evidence they were continuing to discover. The breakthrough that began to reveal the true horror of Sullivan's operation came when Officer Thompson discovered a concealed entrance to underground facilities, hidden beneath what appeared to be a standard medical examination table in the main residence. The entrance was secured with a sophisticated electronic lock system that Foster was able to bypass using specialized equipment designed for defeating security systems during tactical operations. As the concealed door opened, revealing a staircase leading down into underground chambers, the team was immediately struck by a wave of cool air, carrying the unmistakable smell of medical waste, combined with something far more disturbing that seemed to permeate the underground spaces. The air movement suggested extensive underground ventilation systems and significant subsurface facilities that had been completely undetected during the intelligence-gathering phase of the operation. Richardson made the tactical decision to proceed with clearing the underground facilities despite the operation having already deviated dramatically from their original intelligence assessments and tactical plans. The team's training emphasized thoroughness and adaptability, particularly when evidence suggested ongoing criminal activity that might require immediate intervention to protect potential victims who could be in immediate danger. The staircase led down approximately 12 feet to a corridor that extended in both directions from the main residence, suggesting an underground network that might connect all of the compound's surface structures. The corridor walls were finished with medical-grade materials, including ceramic tiles and stainless steel fixtures that would allow easy cleaning and sterilization, while overhead lighting provided bright illumination throughout the underground areas. The basement level revealed a sophisticated network of underground chambers that had been constructed beneath the main residence and possibly extending to the outbuildings, creating an integrated underground facility that was clearly not intended for any legitimate purpose. The construction quality was professional and expensive, suggesting significant financial investment and careful long-term planning in the facility's development. Alpha Team's systematic clearing of the underground facility revealed 8 individual holding cells, each approximately 8 feet by 10 feet, and equipped with medical monitoring equipment, restraint systems, and basic sanitation facilities. 5 of the cells showed clear evidence of recent occupation, with personal belongings, makeshift bedding, and medical charts indicating that subjects had been held in the facilities for extended periods ranging from several days to several weeks. The medical charts found in the occupied cells contained detailed documentation of medical procedures that appeared designed to test human physiological responses to various forms of trauma, stress, and medical intervention. The charts were written in clinical language, but documented activities that were clearly torture conducted under the guise of medical research, with detailed notations about pain responses, drug reactions, and physical endurance under various forms of abuse. Most disturbing was the discovery of a central surgical theater located at the junction of the underground facility's main corridors. The surgical theater was equipped with professional-grade medical equipment, including anesthesia machines, surgical lighting, monitoring equipment, and what appeared to be video recording and broadcasting equipment, suggesting that the procedures conducted in the facility had been documented and possibly transmitted to external observers in real time. Computer systems found in an adjacent control room contained massive amounts of data, including thousands of hours of recorded footage documenting surgical procedures and medical experiments performed on unwilling subjects. The digital files were organized with bureaucratic precision, including detailed databases cataloging subjects by physical characteristics, medical history, and responses to various experimental procedures. The recorded footage, which would later become crucial evidence in the prosecution phase of the case, revealed the full extent of Sullivan's operation and clearly established the identities of multiple accomplices who had participated in what prosecutors would describe as systematic torture and murder, conducted with medical precision and clinical detachment. Officer Hayes, conducting a medical assessment of the underground facility while attempting to maintain professional composure despite the horrific evidence surrounding him, discovered documentation of experimental procedures that appeared designed to test the limits of human endurance and pain tolerance. Medical charts documented the systematic torture of subjects under the guise of scientific research, with detailed notations about physiological responses to various forms of trauma, including surgical procedures performed without adequate anesthesia, experimental drug testing, and physical abuse designed to produce specific medical data. The charts bore signatures from multiple individuals, including several with medical degrees from prestigious institutions, advanced surgical training, and legitimate medical licenses. The participation of licensed medical professionals in the documented torture and murder elevated the criminal case to levels that challenged prosecutors' ability to adequately describe the violations of medical ethics and human rights that had occurred within the facility. At 06:15 hours, approximately 45 minutes after the initial breach of the compound, Officers Morgan and Parker reported discovering additional facilities hidden within the wooded areas of the property. These appeared to be temporary holding and processing facilities, essentially modified shipping containers that had been equipped with ventilation systems, basic sanitation, and security measures designed to hold multiple individuals for extended periods. 2 of the shipping containers held clear evidence of recent occupation, including personal belongings from multiple individuals, makeshift bedding, and waste disposal systems. A 3rd container, which Morgan and Parker approached with extreme caution due to the overwhelming smell emanating from its interior, contained human remains in various states of decomposition, including at least 3 complete bodies and partial remains from several additional victims. The scope and sophistication of Sullivan's operation was becoming clear to Richardson and his team as they continued their investigation throughout the morning hours. Rather than the drug manufacturing facility they had expected to encounter, they had uncovered what appeared to be an international human trafficking and medical experimentation network that had been operating for an extended period with shocking organizational efficiency and clinical precision. The evidence suggested that Sullivan and his accomplices had been systematically abducting individuals, primarily targeting homeless persons, undocumented immigrants, and other vulnerable populations who were unlikely to be immediately missed by family members or social service agencies. These victims were then subjected to experimental medical procedures that were being recorded and sold to an international network of buyers who were paying significant amounts to observe live torture and murder conducted with medical precision. As tactical teams continued their documentation of evidence throughout the morning, the psychological toll of their discoveries began to affect even these experienced law enforcement professionals who had witnessed extensive criminal violence during their careers. Officer Thompson, who was responsible for photographing and cataloging evidence to support future prosecution efforts, requested relief after discovering a storage room containing hundreds of identification documents, photographs, and personal belongings from victims. Many of the photographs showed individuals before and after various medical procedures, creating a horrific catalog of human suffering that had been organized and preserved with bureaucratic efficiency. The systematic documentation of victim abuse demonstrated a level of premeditation and organized cruelty that exceeded anything the tactical team had encountered during their combined decades of law enforcement experience. The investigation expanded rapidly as federal authorities arrived on scene to coordinate with local law enforcement and begin the complex process of documenting evidence that would support prosecutions across multiple jurisdictions. FBI Special Agent Linda Rodriguez, who had been tracking similar operations across multiple states as part of a federal task force investigating international human trafficking networks, confirmed that the Riverside compound was connected to a larger network of at least 6 similar facilities operating throughout the Southwest region. Agent Rodriguez's preliminary assessment indicated that the operation represented what she described as human trafficking evolved into something far more sinister than we had previously encountered in domestic law enforcement. The combination of sophisticated medical knowledge, international marketing of torture and murder, and the systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations created a criminal case unlike anything federal prosecutors had previously encountered in the United States. By noon on March 15th, the active crime scene had expanded to encompass the entire 3-acre property, plus additional locations that were being identified through analysis of computer evidence seized from the compound's digital systems. Forensic teams worked through the afternoon and into the evening, systematically documenting evidence that would eventually support criminal charges against 23 individuals across 4 states. The basement facility alone yielded over 400 pieces of physical evidence, including surgical instruments, restraint devices, medical charts, pharmaceutical supplies, and personal belongings from victims. Computer systems contained multiple terabytes of recorded footage, financial records, communication logs, and databases documenting the systematic abuse and murder of at least 47 identified victims. The psychological impact on Alpha team members was immediate and severe, representing a form of law enforcement trauma that traditional training programs had not addressed. Officer Thompson, despite 12 years of tactical experience, including multiple homicide scenes and organized crime investigations, suffered what department psychologists later diagnosed as acute stress reaction, following her prolonged exposure to the recorded footage and photographic evidence found throughout the basement facility. The recorded materials documented not only the systematic torture and murder of victims, but also the clinical detachment with which Sullivan and his accomplices had approached their criminal activities. The footage showed medical professionals conducting experimental procedures with the same procedural precision they would use during legitimate medical treatment, creating a disturbing juxtaposition between medical professionalism and intentional human suffering. Officer Hayes requested immediate transfer from tactical operations following the Riverside operation, citing his inability to process the medical evidence he had been required to examine and document during the investigation. Hayes's medical training, which had been an asset during previous tactical operations, became a psychological burden as he was able to understand in precise detail the suffering that had been inflicted on Sullivan's victims through the experimental procedures documented in the facility's medical records. Commander Richardson, in his comprehensive after-action report submitted to department administration and federal authorities, noted that the Riverside operation represented a fundamental intelligence failure that had placed his team in psychological danger for which their extensive training had not prepared them. We train extensively for armed resistance, hostage situations, and conventional criminal operations involving drugs, weapons, and organized crime, Richardson wrote in his official assessment. Nothing in our protocols or training programs addressed the psychological impact of discovering systematic human experimentation conducted on this scale and with this level of clinical precision. The case against Marcus Sullivan and his network of accomplices developed rapidly, as forensic analysis of evidence from the compound revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Sullivan, who was arrested at his downtown Phoenix office the same afternoon as the tactical operation, initially maintained his innocence and claimed complete ignorance of any criminal activities conducted at his Riverside property. However, computer evidence quickly established Sullivan's central role in what federal prosecutors described as an international network dedicated to the systematic commodification of human suffering through torture and murder conducted with medical precision. Financial records seized from Sullivan's business offices revealed payments totaling over $3.2 million from international clients who had purchased access to live-streamed torture and murder sessions conducted in the compound's underground surgical theater. The international scope of Sullivan's customer base shocked federal investigators and demonstrated the existence of a global market for extreme criminal content that law enforcement agencies had not previously identified or understood. Payment records indicated clients in over 20 countries who had paid substantial amounts to observe specific forms of torture and murder, with pricing, structures that varied based on the severity of abuse requested and the demographic characteristics of victims. Dr. Patricia Wells, a forensic psychologist specializing in law enforcement trauma, who was contracted to evaluate Alpha team members following their exposure to evidence from the Riverside compound, noted that the operation represented a unique form of psychological trauma that traditional law enforcement training had not addressed. These officers entered the compound expecting to confront drug dealers, and instead discovered evidence of systematic torture and murder conducted with medical precision by licensed professionals, Dr. Wells explained in her assessment report. The violation of medical ethics, combined with the industrial-scale organization of human suffering, created a psychological impact that traditional tactical training protocols do not address, Wells continued. The officers were confronted not only with evidence of extreme criminal behavior, but also with the realization that licensed medical professionals had systematically violated their professional oaths in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature and professional ethics. The trial of Marcus Sullivan and his primary accomplices began 18 months after the Riverside raid and continued for 4 weeks as prosecutors presented evidence that included extensive video footage from the compound's basement facility, medical records documenting the torture and murder of 47 identified victims, and financial records demonstrating the international scope of Sullivan's criminal enterprise. Evidence presented during the trial included testimony from surviving victims who had been rescued from similar facilities operated by Sullivan's network, expert testimony from medical professionals who analyzed the experimental procedures documented in Sullivan's records, and financial analysis demonstrating the substantial profits generated through the systematic torture and murder of vulnerable individuals. Sullivan was ultimately sentenced to death following his conviction on federal charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, racketeering, and violations of federal laws prohibiting the production and distribution of extreme criminal content. His medical accomplices received life sentences without possibility of parole, while individuals involved in victim acquisition and facility operations received sentences ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. For the members of Alpha Team, the aftermath of the Riverside operation led to fundamental changes in how they approached tactical operations and processed the psychological impact of extreme criminal investigations. New protocols were established within Phoenix Metro's tactical operations to provide immediate psychological support following operations that revealed evidence of extreme criminal behavior, with mandatory counseling and the option to transfer to non-tactical positions without career penalties. Officer Parker, who had been responsible for pre-operation intelligence analysis, struggled with intense guilt over the intelligence failure that had led Alpha Team into the compound without adequate psychological preparation for what they would discover. "We thought we were conducting a routine drug raid," Parker later told departmental investigators during post-operation interviews. "Instead, we walked into something that will haunt every member of our team for the rest of our careers. The intelligence failure wasn't just operational. It represented a complete failure to prepare us psychologically for confronting evil on this scale." The Riverside case led to significant changes in how intelligence agencies develop target profiles for tactical operations involving suspected drug manufacturing facilities. New protocols require multiple independent verification sources before operations are authorized, particularly for compounds that demonstrate sophisticated security measures inconsistent with typical drug operations. Intelligence analysts now receive specialized training in recognizing indicators that might suggest criminal operations beyond traditional drug trafficking. Training programs for tactical officers now include psychological preparation components designed to help officers process encounters with extreme criminal behavior that might challenge their fundamental assumptions about human nature and criminal motivation. These training modules, developed in direct response to the Riverside incident, include simulated scenarios where officers must confront evidence of systematic torture, human trafficking, and other extreme crimes while maintaining operational effectiveness and psychological stability. 6 months following the Riverside raid, Officer Morgan made the difficult decision to leave law enforcement entirely, citing his inability to process what he had witnessed in the compound's underground facility and his concerns about the lasting psychological impact on his personal relationships and mental health. In his resignation letter, Morgan wrote, "I joined the SWAT team because I wanted to protect people from dangerous criminals and make a positive difference in my community. What we discovered at Riverside showed me that some criminals operate so far beyond our normal understanding of human behavior that confronting them changes you in ways you can never fully recover from." Morgan's departure represented a significant loss for Phoenix Metro, as he had demonstrated exceptional tactical skills and leadership potential during his brief tenure with Alpha Team. However, department administrators recognized that his decision reflected a legitimate response to psychological trauma that exceeded the normal stresses associated with tactical law enforcement operations. The compound at 4847 Riverside Drive was demolished 6 months after the raid, following extensive forensic examination that had documented every aspect of Sullivan's operation for use in prosecutions and academic study of extreme criminal behavior. The property remained vacant for over 2 years following the demolition, having proven impossible to sell despite being offered at significantly below market value, and having been completely reconstructed to eliminate any physical traces of the criminal activities that had occurred there. Local residents reported persistent psychological unease about the area, with many noting that the surrounding neighborhood had never felt the same since the discoveries made during the tactical operation. Real estate professionals described the property as psychologically contaminated, in a way that made it unmarketable regardless of physical renovations or price reductions. Dr. Wells, in her comprehensive final report on the psychological impact of the Riverside operation, concluded that tactical law enforcement teams required specialized training and support systems to prepare them for operations that might reveal evidence of extreme criminal behavior that challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature and professional ethics. The traditional focus on physical threats and tactical responses is inadequate when officers might encounter evidence of systematic human rights violations conducted with professional precision, Dr. Wells wrote in her assessment. We need to prepare our tactical officers for the psychological reality that some criminal operations exist completely outside the boundaries of what we consider normal human behavior, even criminal behavior. The report recommended development of specialized psychological support protocols for tactical teams, including pre-operation briefings that prepare officers for potential psychological challenges, immediate post-operation psychological assessment and support, and long-term counseling resources for officers who encounter evidence of extreme criminal behavior during their operational duties. Today, the Riverside operation is studied at tactical training centers throughout the United States as a critical example of how intelligence failures can place officers in psychological danger that may prove more lasting and debilitating than physical threats encountered during tactical operations. The case has influenced the development of new protocols for post-operation psychological support, and has led to increased funding for mental health resources within tactical units across the country. The training program, developed at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers, now includes a specific module based on the Riverside incident, focusing on the psychological challenges officers face when confronting evidence of extreme criminal behavior that violates fundamental assumptions about human nature and professional ethics. The module emphasizes the importance of team communication, psychological resilience, and recognition of trauma symptoms that might affect operational effectiveness. Commander Richardson remained with Phoenix Metro SWAT for 2 additional years following the Riverside operation, during which time he became a leading advocate for improved psychological support for tactical officers and played a key role in developing new training protocols that addressed the psychological challenges revealed by the Riverside investigation. Richardson ultimately transferred to training duties, where he now teaches tactical officers about the importance of psychological preparation alongside physical readiness for extreme tactical situations. Riverside taught us that the most dangerous threats aren't always the ones shooting back at you, Richardson tells new recruits during psychological preparation training. Sometimes the most lasting wounds come from what you discover about human beings when you encounter them at their absolute worst. Richardson's training curriculum now includes extensive discussion of the psychological impact of encountering extreme criminal behavior, with emphasis on recognizing the signs of psychological trauma and the importance of seeking professional support when operational experiences exceed normal stress tolerance levels. The evidence recovered from the Riverside compound ultimately led to the identification and rescue of 23 additional victims from similar facilities operated by Sullivan's network across the Southwest region. The international network that had been purchasing access to Sullivan's torture and murder broadcasts was dismantled through coordinated law enforcement action involving agencies from 12 countries and resulting in over 60 arrests worldwide. However, for the members of Alpha Team who made the initial discovery at the Riverside compound, the professional satisfaction of having disrupted a major criminal network was overshadowed by the lasting psychological impact of having confronted evidence of human cruelty that exceeded their previous understanding of criminal behavior. As Officer Chen noted in his final interview before retiring from tactical operations 18 months after the Riverside raid, "We went into that compound expecting to find criminals manufacturing drugs, and instead we found evidence of systematic torture and murder conducted by medical professionals with clinical precision. That's not something you can unsee or unfeel or forget. It changes how you look at the world, how you trust people, how you sleep at night." Chen's statement reflected the experiences of all Alpha Team members who participated in the Riverside operation. Despite extensive counseling and psychological support, each team member reported lasting changes in their worldview and their ability to process the routine stresses of tactical law enforcement work. "Some discoveries you make as a police officer stay with you forever," Chen continued. "Riverside is one of those discoveries that makes you question everything you thought you knew about human nature and what people are capable of doing to other human beings when they think no one is watching." The psychological assessment conducted by Dr. Wells 18 months after the operation found that all Alpha Team members continued to experience symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including intrusive memories, sleep disturbances, and hypervigilance that exceeded normal levels for tactical law enforcement personnel. Most concerning to treating psychologists was the finding that traditional law enforcement counseling approaches proved inadequate for addressing the specific psychological trauma associated with discovering evidence of systematic torture and murder conducted with medical precision by licensed professionals. The violation of medical ethics and the industrial-scale organization of human suffering created psychological challenges that required specialized therapeutic approaches not typically available through standard law enforcement employee assistance programs. Officer Thompson, who had been responsible for photographing and documenting evidence throughout the compound, developed what psychologists diagnosed as complex post-traumatic stress disorder following her prolonged exposure to the recorded footage and photographic evidence found throughout Sullivan's facility. The hardest part wasn't just seeing what had been done to those people, Thompson explained during psychological evaluation sessions. It was realizing that every procedure had been documented with medical precision, that there were people who had watched this happening and paid money to see it, that there was an entire international network of people who got pleasure from watching other human beings being tortured and murdered. Thompson's psychological treatment required over 2 years of specialized therapy focusing on processing trauma associated with extreme criminal behavior and developing coping mechanisms for intrusive memories that traditional law enforcement counseling had been unable to address effectively. Sergeant Foster, whose explosives expertise had been crucial during the initial breach of the compound, struggled with guilt over having enabled the team's discovery of Sullivan's operation. Despite rational understanding that her actions had been necessary to rescue victims and gather evidence for prosecution, Foster experienced persistent guilt over having opened the doors that led to her team's psychological trauma. "I know we did the right thing," Foster told department psychologists during treatment sessions. "We stopped something horrible and saved lives, but knowing that doesn't make it easier to live with the images and the knowledge of what human beings can do to each other when they have power and no conscience." Foster's treatment included specialized therapy techniques designed to help law enforcement officers process guilt associated, including contracted specialists in law enforcement trauma and treatment approaches specifically designed for officers who encounter evidence of extreme criminal behavior during their operational duties. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the clinical psychologist who became the primary treatment specialist for tactical officers following the Riverside incident, noted that traditional approaches to law enforcement trauma were inadequate for addressing the specific psychological challenges associated with discovering evidence of systematic torture and murder. These officers weren't just exposed to violence or death, Dr. Mitchell explained in her assessment of treatment approaches. They were confronted with evidence of human cruelty, organized with industrial efficiency, and conducted by individuals with professional medical training. The violation of professional ethics, combined with the scale of human suffering, created psychological trauma that required specialized treatment approaches. Dr. Mitchell's treatment protocols, developed specifically for the Alpha team members, included techniques borrowed from treatment of military personnel exposed to war crimes, survivors of concentration camps, and other individuals who had encountered evidence of systematic human rights violations. The treatment approach emphasized the importance of meaning-making and moral repair, helping officers process their experiences in ways that maintained their fundamental faith in human decency while acknowledging the reality of extreme criminal behavior they had encountered. 3 years after the Riverside operation, Phoenix Metro conducted a comprehensive review of the incident's impact on departmental operations, officer welfare, and tactical effectiveness. The review found that while the operation had successfully disrupted a major criminal network and led to the rescue of numerous victims, the psychological cost to personnel had been substantially higher than anticipated. The review recommended significant changes to intelligence gathering protocols, psychological preparation for tactical operations, and post-operation support services. Most importantly, the review established new criteria for operations that might expose personnel to evidence of extreme criminal behavior, including mandatory psychological support and the option for officers to withdraw from operations that exceeded their personal tolerance for psychological trauma. The Riverside compound operation stands as a landmark case, in modern tactical law enforcement, demonstrating both the importance of thorough investigation of sophisticated criminal networks and the need for comprehensive psychological support for officers who encounter evidence of extreme criminal behavior during their operational duties. The case has influenced tactical training programs throughout the United States and has led to improved protocols for supporting law enforcement personnel who encounter evidence of systematic torture, human trafficking, and other extreme crimes that challenge fundamental assumptions about human nature and criminal behavior. For the members of Alpha Team, the Riverside operation became a defining experience that divided their careers into before and after. Before, they encountered evidence of systematic torture and murder conducted with medical precision. And after, they could never forget what human beings are capable of inflicting on each other when they possess power, knowledge, and complete absence of moral restraint. As Commander Richardson noted in his final report on the operation, "We entered that compound as tactical officers trained to confront armed criminals and dangerous situations. We left as witnesses to human evil on a scale that no amount of training or experience had prepared us to understand. Some knowledge changes you permanently, and what we learned at Riverside is knowledge that will stay with every member of Alpha Team for the rest of our lives." The Riverside compound operation ultimately demonstrated that in modern tactical law enforcement, the greatest dangers may not always be physical threats that can be defeated through superior training, equipment, and tactics. Sometimes the most lasting wounds are psychological, inflicted not by bullets or explosives, but by the discovery of human cruelty that exists far beyond the boundaries of what trained professionals believe possible. The case serves as a sobering reminder that those who serve in tactical law enforcement must be prepared not only for physical danger, but also for encounters with evidence of human behavior that challenges fundamental assumptions about morality, professionalism, and the limits of human cruelty. For Alpha Team, March 15, 2019, became a day that taught them there are forms of evil in the world that no amount of training or preparation can fully prepare officers to confront without lasting psychological consequences. The emergency call screamed through the Seattle Metro SWAT Communications Center at 7:43 a.m. on Tuesday, September 8, 2020, shattering the pre-dawn quiet like breaking glass. What began as a reported hostage situation at the prestigious Mindbridge Psychological Research Institute would spiral into the most psychologically twisted and terrifying tactical operation in modern American law enforcement history. A 17-hour descent into madness that would leave elite SWAT operators questioning their own sanity and forever change how tactical teams approach psychological warfare. SWAT Team Commander Samuel Mitchell had been leading Seattle Metro's Tactical Response Division for nearly 9 years when the priority alert blazed across his communication screen. The 46-year-old former Army Ranger had built his reputation through flawless execution of over 200 high-risk operations, including armed barricaded subjects, terrorist threats, and complex multi-hostage scenarios that had tested every aspect of his team's tactical precision and mental fortitude. Mitchell's elite 12-member tactical unit represented the pinnacle of law enforcement specialization. Each operator had been selected through grueling psychological evaluation, extensive background investigation, and months of specialized training that combined advanced tactical skills with crisis psychology, behavioral threat assessment, and negotiation support techniques designed to resolve the most dangerous confrontations through superior firepower, tactical superiority, and unbreakable mental discipline. The team's primary hostage negotiator, Dr. Emily Richardson, brought a unique combination of clinical psychology expertise and tactical training that made her invaluable during complex crisis situations. Richardson had voluntarily completed the same physical and tactical training as sworn SWAT operators while maintaining her credentials as a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in crisis intervention and criminal psychology. Her dual expertise allowed her to understand both the psychological dynamics affecting dangerous subjects and the tactical considerations that influenced operational decision-making during high-stress confrontations. SWAT Sergeant Thomas Wilson served as the unit's tactical coordinator and second-in-command, responsible for seamless integration of negotiation strategies with precision tactical positioning and potential assault planning. Wilson brought 17 years of elite tactical experience, including specialized training in hostage rescue techniques, explosive breaching procedures, close quarters combat, and the split-second timing required to coordinate negotiation efforts with dynamic tactical operations when situations deteriorated beyond peaceful resolution. Officer Rachel Stevens functioned as the team's intelligence analyst and behavioral assessment specialist, responsible for real-time intelligence gathering, threat evaluation, and psychological profiling that informed both negotiation strategies and tactical planning. Stevens' advanced degrees in criminal psychology and behavioral analysis, combined with her tactical training, made her an invaluable asset during complex operations involving mentally unstable subjects or sophisticated criminal organizations that required both tactical precision and psychological insight. The initial emergency call had been placed by Dr. Linda Morrison, a senior research psychologist at the Mindbridge Institute, who reported in a panic-stricken voice that her colleague Dr. Gregory Hoffman had barricaded himself inside the facility's main research laboratory complex with an unknown number of staff members and research subjects. According to Morrison's frantic report to emergency dispatch, Hoffman had been exhibiting increasingly erratic and threatening behavior over recent weeks, making disturbing statements about revolutionary psychological research and necessary human experiments that would demonstrate the true malleable nature of human consciousness. The Mindbridge Psychological Research Institute occupied a converted 6-story industrial complex in Seattle's University District, a sophisticated facility that housed some of the Pacific Northwest's most advanced psychological research laboratories, including specialized chambers for studying human consciousness, perception, memory manipulation, sensory deprivation, and advanced behavioral modification techniques. The Institute had gained international recognition for groundbreaking research into the neurological basis of psychological disorders and had attracted substantial federal funding for classified studies investigating psychological warfare, interrogation techniques, and the effects of prolonged psychological stress on human behavior and mental stability. Dr. Gregory Hoffman, the subject of the emergency hostage report, was a 49-year-old clinical psychologist and research scientist who had joined the Mindbridge Institute 4 years earlier, following a distinguished but increasingly controversial career at Stanford University and the Department of Defense's Classified Psychological Research Division. Hoffman's specialized research focused on the effects of controlled psychological manipulation, sensory deprivation, isolation techniques, and systematic stress induction on human consciousness, cognitive function, and behavioral control. Studies that had produced significant academic recognition, but had also generated growing ethical concerns among colleagues and institutional oversight committees. According to personnel records that would later be reviewed by Commander Mitchell's tactical team, Hoffman had been experiencing mounting professional isolation and administrative pressure over the previous 8 months following heated confrontations with Institute administration regarding research protocols, ethical oversight requirements, and the extreme nature of his experimental procedures involving human subjects. Colleagues reported that Hoffman had become increasingly convinced that institutional review boards, ethics committees, and federal oversight agencies were deliberately sabotaging his research efforts to prevent him from achieving revolutionary breakthroughs in understanding human psychological control and manipulation. Commander Mitchell and his 12-member tactical team arrived at the Mindbridge Institute at 8:22 a.m. to discover a situation far more complex and dangerous than the initial emergency report had indicated. Rather than a straightforward hostage situation involving an unstable employee, intelligence gathering revealed that Hoffman had systematically taken control of the Institute's entire fourth floor, which housed the facility's most sophisticated and potentially dangerous psychological research laboratories, experimental chambers, and advanced equipment designed for conducting extreme psychological manipulation studies on human subjects under carefully controlled conditions. The fourth floor of the Mindbridge Institute had been specifically engineered for conducting cutting-edge psychological research involving human subjects, featuring 16 individual experimental chambers equipped with advanced environmental control systems, sophisticated monitoring equipment, high-definition surveillance cameras, and communication networks that could manipulate lighting, sound, temperature, atmospheric pressure, and other environmental variables to create virtually any psychological testing scenario that researchers might require for studying human responses to extreme psychological stressors, sensory manipulation, and behavioral control techniques. More alarming was intelligence gathered from escaped Institute staff indicating that Hoffman had been conducting unauthorized and increasingly extreme research sessions involving human subjects at the time his psychological break occurred. According to Dr. Morrison's detailed briefing provided to Commander Mitchell, Hoffman had been secretly running what he described as extended consciousness modification studies, involving volunteer subjects who believed they were participating in routine psychological research, but were actually being subjected to increasingly aggressive psychological manipulation, sensory deprivation, and behavioral control experiments that far exceeded approved research protocols and safety guidelines. The initial tactical reconnaissance revealed that Hoffman had effectively transformed the fourth floor into an impregnable fortress, utilizing his intimate knowledge of the building's advanced security systems, environmental controls, and specialized research equipment to create multiple defensive layers while maintaining complete psychological and physical control over the research subjects who had become unwilling participants in his escalating psychological experiments. Security camera footage showed that Hoffman had activated sophisticated lockdown protocols, barricaded access points, disabled elevator systems, and sealed the experimental chambers in ways that prevented unauthorized access while giving him absolute control over environmental conditions throughout the research areas. Most disturbing was intelligence provided by Institute staff who had escaped during the initial chaos of Hoffman's psychological break and hostile takeover of the research floor. According to their terrified reports, Hoffman had been conducting increasingly aggressive and dangerous psychological experiments over recent weeks, including extended sensory deprivation studies lasting far beyond approved safety limits, psychological stress induction protocols that exceeded institutional guidelines, and what appeared to be systematic attempts to induce psychological breaks in volunteer subjects through carefully orchestrated trauma and manipulation techniques. Dr. Morrison's comprehensive briefing revealed that Hoffman's current research subjects included 11 individuals who had volunteered for what they believed were routine psychological studies involving memory, perception, and stress response evaluation. However, Hoffman had systematically modified his research protocols without institutional approval, informed consent from subjects, or oversight from ethics committees, extending experimental sessions far beyond agreed durations while introducing increasingly extreme psychological stressors, manipulation techniques, and trauma induction methods that had not been disclosed during the voluntary consent process. The research subjects, according to detailed Institute records, included graduate students from the University of Washington's psychology and neuroscience programs who had volunteered for extra credit and modest financial compensation, Individuals recruited through carefully worded classified advertisements seeking participants for advanced psychological research studies, military veterans who had volunteered for studies supposedly investigating post-traumatic stress disorder treatment approaches, and several individuals with documented histories of psychological trauma who had been specifically targeted and recruited for studies Hoffman claimed were investigating innovative therapeutic techniques. Commander Mitchell's initial tactical assessment revealed multiple serious complications that elevated the incident far beyond typical hostage scenarios and into uncharted territory that challenged standard SWAT protocols and training. Hoffman's control of the fourth floor included access to sophisticated psychological manipulation equipment, environmental control systems, and monitoring technology that could potentially affect not only the hostage subjects, but also any law enforcement personnel who attempted tactical intervention or rescue operations. The research chambers were equipped with advanced systems capable of manipulating sensory input, controlling lighting and sound environments, creating disorienting psychological conditions, and potentially compromising tactical effectiveness through systematic psychological manipulation of anyone who entered the controlled research areas. Dr. Richardson's preliminary psychological assessment of Hoffman, based on personnel records, academic publications, and detailed interviews with colleagues who had worked closely with him, suggested a highly intelligent individual with extensive expertise in psychological manipulation techniques, behavioral control methods, and access to sophisticated equipment and experimental protocols that could dramatically amplify his ability to psychologically control both hostages and law enforcement responders. Richardson's professional evaluation indicated that traditional negotiation approaches would likely prove inadequate or potentially counterproductive, given Hoffman's advanced expertise in psychological manipulation. His apparent genuine belief that he was conducting legitimate revolutionary scientific research, and his demonstrated willingness to use extreme methods to achieve his research objectives. The tactical situation became significantly more complex when initial communication attempts revealed that Hoffman had established comprehensive monitoring and communication systems throughout the fourth floor that provided him with real-time surveillance of law enforcement positioning, tactical planning discussions, and operational preparations. Advanced security camera networks, audio monitoring systems, and electronic surveillance equipment gave Hoffman unprecedented intelligence regarding law enforcement activities both inside and outside the building, while sophisticated communication systems allowed him to observe, record, and potentially manipulate law enforcement communications and tactical coordination efforts. Hoffman's first direct communication with Commander Mitchell's tactical team came at 9:47 a.m., approximately 1 hour and 4 minutes after the initial emergency call. But rather than typical hostage-taker demands, negotiations, or threats, Hoffman's communication took the unprecedented form of what he described as preliminary research findings regarding the psychological responses of his subjects to controlled stress environments and genuine life-threatening circumstances. I need you to understand that what's occurring in this facility represents the most significant advancement in psychological research in the past 50 years. Hoffman's voice emerged through the building's sophisticated intercom system with clinical precision, disturbing calm, and the detached professionalism of an academic researcher presenting findings to colleagues. These volunteer subjects agreed to participate in psychological research designed to advance human understanding, and I'm simply extending the parameters of our studies to include real-world psychological stressors and genuine life-threatening variables that traditional laboratory conditions cannot ethically or practically replicate. Hoffman's communication revealed a psychological profile that deeply concerned Dr. Richardson and fundamentally challenged traditional approaches to hostage negotiation and crisis resolution. Rather than exhibiting typical patterns of desperation, anger, psychotic break, or criminal motivation associated with hostage takers, Hoffman appeared to be approaching the entire situation as a natural extension of his psychological research, viewing both his original volunteer subjects and the law enforcement response as integral components of an expanded experimental protocol designed to study human psychological responses under genuine extreme stress conditions. The research subjects are providing absolutely unprecedented data regarding stress response mechanisms, group dynamics under genuine life-threatening circumstances, and psychological adaptation processes that decades of laboratory research could never reveal, Hoffman continued during his initial communication session. I'm documenting real-time physiological responses, behavioral modification patterns, and psychological adaptation mechanisms that represent revolutionary advances in our understanding of human consciousness, behavioral control, and psychological resilience under extreme conditions. The deeply disturbing implication of Hoffman's calm, clinical communication was his apparent genuine belief that the hostage situation represented not a crisis requiring resolution, but rather an unprecedented research opportunity that he intended to continue for as long as necessary, to maximize the psychological data, behavioral observations, and experimental insights he could extract from his subjects' responses to prolonged extreme stress, uncertainty, and genuine fear for their lives. Dr. Richardson's detailed analysis of Hoffman's communication patterns, psychological presentation, and apparent motivations led her to conclude that traditional hostage negotiation strategies would likely prove not only ineffective, but potentially dangerous and counterproductive. Hoffman's extensive professional expertise in psychological manipulation meant that he would immediately recognize and potentially counter standard negotiation techniques, while his apparent genuine conviction that he was conducting legitimate scientific research created psychological motivations and belief systems that differed fundamentally from typical hostage-taker psychology. We're confronting someone who understands psychological manipulation, behavioral control, and crisis psychology as well as, or potentially better than our own team, Dr. Richardson explained to Commander Mitchell during the critical tactical planning session. Hoffman isn't simply holding hostages for ransom, political demands, or personal gratification. He's conducting what he genuinely believes is revolutionary psychological research, using those hostages as unwilling experimental subjects. Traditional negotiation assumes the subject wants something we can provide or fears consequences we can impose. Hoffman appears motivated solely by continuing his research, and he may not fear legal consequences because he believes his scientific work justifies any methods necessary. Intelligence gathered during the first critical hours of the operation revealed that Hoffman had been systematically preparing for this exact situation for several months, possibly as long as a year. Security footage from previous weeks showed him moving specialized equipment between research chambers, installing additional monitoring devices and environmental control systems, modifying experimental protocols and chamber configurations, and studying law enforcement tactical procedures, hostage negotiation techniques, and crisis psychology literature as part of what he had described to colleagues as research into authority response patterns during crisis situations involving psychological research facilities. Most alarming was the discovery that Hoffman had been systematically studying SWAT tactical procedures, hostage rescue techniques, and law enforcement crisis response protocols not as potential defensive measures, but as components of his psychological research. Hoffman's extensive preparation suggested that he had deliberately anticipated and planned for law enforcement response, intending to use tactical teams, negotiation efforts, and rescue attempts as additional variables in his psychological experiments on human stress response and behavioral modification under extreme circumstances. The research subjects currently under Hoffman's psychological and physical control included 24-year-old graduate student Sarah Coleman, who had volunteered for what she believed was a routine 3-day study examining memory consolidation processes during controlled sleep deprivation. 32-year-old military veteran Kenneth Bradley, who had enrolled in what he thought was a legitimate study investigating innovative treatment approaches for post-traumatic stress disorder and military-related psychological trauma. 27-year-old psychology undergraduate Michelle Torres, who was participating in research she believed examined perception and attention mechanisms under controlled stress conditions. And 8 additional individuals whose specific identities, backgrounds, and research participation details were still being determined through Institute personnel records and emergency contact information. According to Dr. Morrison's increasingly detailed briefings provided to the tactical team, the research subjects had been systematically deceived regarding the true nature of their participation. While they had been informed that studies would involve controlled psychological stressors and temporary discomfort, they had not been told that these stressors would include genuine, life-threatening situations, extended periods of uncertainty and terror, systematic psychological manipulation designed to induce trauma responses, or that their psychological reactions would be used as data in unauthorized experiments that violated every principle of research ethics and human subject protection. The subjects believed they were contributing to legitimate scientific research that would advance psychological understanding and potentially help future patients with psychological disorders. None had been informed that Hoffman intended to use law enforcement response, tactical operations, and genuine fear for their lives as components of his experimental protocols, or that their psychological breakdown and trauma responses were being systematically documented and analyzed as primary research data. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Hoffman's communications with Commander Mitchell's tactical team became increasingly detailed, disturbing, and clinically detached. Rather than engaging in traditional negotiation dialogue or making demands typical of hostage situations, Hoffman began providing regular, comprehensive updates on his subjects' psychological responses, treating the SWAT team as professional colleagues who would appreciate the scientific significance of his behavioral observations and experimental findings. Subject Coleman, I'm using first names to maintain professional confidentiality, is demonstrating textbook acute stress response patterns with elevated cortisol levels, increased anxiety behaviors, and fight-or-flight activation that corresponds precisely to established psychological models, Hoffman reported during one afternoon communication session, his voice maintaining the same clinical detachment he might use when presenting research findings at an academic conference. However, she's also exhibiting remarkable psychological adaptation mechanisms and resilience indicators that suggest current literature significantly underestimates human capacity for psychological adjustment under genuine, life-threatening circumstances. Hoffman's reports included obsessively detailed observations of how his subjects were responding to extended uncertainty, the gradually dawning realization that their situation had evolved far beyond routine research participation, the knowledge that armed law enforcement personnel were attempting to rescue them, and the systematic psychological manipulation he was implementing through environmental controls, isolation techniques, and carefully orchestrated psychological pressure designed to test the absolute limits of human psychological endurance. Subject Bradley's military background and combat experience are producing particularly fascinating data regarding trained stress response versus civilian psychological adaptation, Hoffman continued in another communication session. His military training provides psychological resilience and tactical awareness that allows him to maintain emotional control and leadership behaviors, while simultaneously demonstrating protective instincts toward other subjects who lack his specialized background. This suggests that psychological preparation and combat training can significantly modify stress responses and behavioral patterns even under circumstances that exceed typical military combat stress levels. The clinical detachment and academic precision in Hoffman's observations was profoundly disturbing to the tactical team, as it clearly indicated that he viewed his hostage subjects purely as experimental data and research material rather than human beings whose lives, psychological well-being, and fundamental human dignity were being systematically destroyed for his scientific curiosity. Hoffman's extensive professional training in psychology appeared to have created a form of clinical dissociation that allowed him to rationalize the severe psychological trauma he was inflicting as legitimate scientific research that justified any level of human suffering necessary to advance psychological understanding. Dr. Richardson's repeated attempts to engage Hoffman in traditional negotiation dialogue consistently failed, as Hoffman systematically redirected all conversations toward detailed discussions of psychological research methodology, experimental design protocols, statistical analysis of behavioral data, and lengthy explanations of the revolutionary scientific value of the unprecedented psychological data he was collecting through his systematic torture of unwilling human subjects. When Dr. Richardson attempted to appeal to Hoffman's ethical responsibilities as a licensed psychologist and his professional obligations to protect human subjects from psychological harm, he responded with sophisticated arguments about the limitations of current research ethics guidelines, institutional review board restrictions that prevented psychological research from addressing fundamental questions about human consciousness, and his philosophical belief that significant scientific advances required acceptance of calculated risks and temporary psychological discomfort that would ultimately benefit humanity through revolutionary advances in psychological understanding and behavioral control techniques. Current institutional review boards and ethics oversight committees are systematically preventing psychological research from addressing the most critical questions about human consciousness, behavioral modification, and psychological control, Hoffman explained during one extended communication session, his voice carrying the passionate conviction of a researcher who believed he was fighting against institutional barriers to scientific progress. Laboratory conditions can only provide severely limited insights into genuine psychological responses and behavioral patterns. These volunteer subjects agreed to contribute to psychological research that would advance human understanding, and I'm simply ensuring that their contribution produces maximum scientific value and revolutionary insights that could transform our understanding of human psychology. Hoffman's sophisticated rationalization of his systematic psychological torture demonstrated a form of ethical tunnel vision and moral blindness that allowed him to justify increasingly extreme experimental procedures by focusing exclusively on potential scientific benefits, while completely minimizing, rationalizing, or ignoring the severe psychological trauma, lasting mental damage, and fundamental human rights violations he was systematically inflicting on his unwilling research subjects. His extensive professional expertise in psychology provided him with complex theoretical frameworks and clinical language that allowed him to describe torture as research, systematic trauma induction as data collection, and human rights violations as scientific methodology, creating a psychological defense system that protected him from recognizing the true nature of his criminal behavior. As the afternoon progressed toward evening, Hoffman began implementing what he described as Phase 2 of his expanded research protocol, which involved introducing additional systematic psychological stressors specifically designed to test his subjects' psychological adaptation mechanisms and mental resilience under escalating threat conditions and increasing psychological pressure. Hoffman's implementation of Phase 2 included systematically reducing lighting throughout the research chambers to create disorienting darkness, introducing irregular sound patterns designed to prevent sleep and increase psychological stress levels, beginning to separate subjects into individual isolation chambers to study the effects of social isolation on psychological stability, and implementing what he described as customized psychological pressure protocols based on detailed psychological profiles he had developed for each subject. Phase 2 allows us to examine how psychological responses, behavioral patterns, and stress adaptation mechanisms change and evolve when subjects begin to realize that their situation is not following expected patterns or timelines, Hoffman explained during his evening communication with the tactical team, his clinical tone remaining disturbingly calm despite the escalating psychological torture he was systematically implementing. The subjects initially maintained hope and psychological stability based on expectations that law enforcement would resolve the situation quickly and safely. However, as time extends and uncertainty increases while their situation becomes increasingly unpredictable, we're observing absolutely fascinating changes in coping mechanisms, group dynamics, individual, psychological adaptation strategies, and the progressive breakdown of normal psychological defense systems. Hoffman's detailed description of Phase 2 revealed that he had systematically planned the hostage situation as a carefully orchestrated, multi-stage psychological experiment with progressively escalating stress conditions, systematic psychological manipulation, and increasingly extreme trauma induction techniques designed to test the absolute limits of human psychological endurance under genuine, life-threatening circumstances while documenting every aspect of their psychological breakdown for his research data. The horrifying realization that Hoffman was methodically and systematically increasing psychological pressure on his subjects while simultaneously documenting their trauma responses, psychological deterioration, and mental breakdown as primary research data created an extremely urgent tactical situation that demanded immediate intervention regardless of operational risks or tactical complications. Commander Mitchell's tactical assessment indicated that traditional waiting strategies that relied on suspect exhaustion, psychological pressure, or negotiation breakthrough would prove not only ineffective but actually counterproductive, as Hoffman appeared to be drawing psychological energy, professional satisfaction, and research motivation from the unprecedented opportunity to conduct extreme psychological experiments under genuine, life-threatening conditions. The longer the situation continued, the more comprehensive psychological data Hoffman could collect. The more extreme his experimental procedures would become, and the greater the risk of permanent psychological trauma, lasting mental damage, or psychological breaks that could destroy his subjects' mental health permanently. However, tactical intervention was severely complicated by Hoffman's intimate knowledge of the building's complex layout and security systems, his complete control of sophisticated environmental manipulation equipment that could seriously affect tactical operations, his demonstrated ability to monitor law enforcement communications and positioning through advanced surveillance systems, and his extensive professional knowledge of psychological manipulation techniques that could potentially be used against tactical personnel during rescue operations. Hoffman had effectively created a tactical nightmare scenario where traditional SWAT approaches were systematically compromised, while he maintained significant psychological and technological advantages through his specialized professional expertise, advanced research equipment, and comprehensive preparation for law enforcement response. The critical breakthrough in understanding Hoffman's psychological state and potential vulnerabilities came when Dr. Richardson conducted detailed analysis of patterns in his communications, behavioral presentations, and psychological defense mechanisms, leading her to realize that Hoffman was not simply conducting unauthorized research or experiencing a straightforward psychological break. he was manifesting what appeared to be a complex psychological defense system that had developed as a response to mounting professional pressure and ethical conflicts regarding his increasingly extreme research interests. Hoffman isn't just violating research ethics or conducting unauthorized experiments, Dr. Richardson explained to Commander Mitchell during the crucial evening tactical briefing. He's created an elaborate psychological framework and belief system that allows him to completely avoid recognizing that he's systematically torturing and psychologically destroying innocent human beings. His obsessive focus on scientific methodology, research protocols, and data collection is serving as a comprehensive psychological defense mechanism that prevents him from acknowledging the human cost, ethical violations, and criminal nature of his actions. Dr. Richardson's psychological assessment suggested that Hoffman's apparent clinical detachment and scientific rationalization might actually represent profound psychological fragility and moral distress, rather than coldness, cruelty, or sadistic motivation. Hoffman's extensive focus on research procedures, scientific justification, and academic language appeared to be protecting him from confronting the full emotional and ethical reality of the systematic psychological torture and human rights violations he was inflicting on his unwilling subjects. This psychological insight suggested a potential negotiation approach that might prove more effective than traditional hostage negotiation strategies. Rather than attempting to threaten, bargain with, or pressure Hoffman through conventional means, Dr. Richardson proposed a carefully orchestrated psychological intervention designed to gradually undermine his elaborate defense mechanisms by forcing him to confront the human impact and ethical reality of his actions without providing opportunities for him to retreat into scientific rationalization or clinical detachment. If we can systematically prevent Hoffman from maintaining his clinical detachment and scientific rationalization, we might be able to create sufficient psychological pressure and moral distress to motivate him to end the situation voluntarily, Dr. Richardson explained to the tactical team. His entire psychological framework and belief system depends absolutely on viewing his subjects as research data, experimental variables, and scientific material rather than human beings with feelings, families, and fundamental rights. If we can force him to recognize their humanity, individual personalities, and the real psychological damage he's causing, his underlying professional training and ethical background might reassert themselves sufficiently to overcome his current psychological defense system. The strategy Dr. Richardson proposed required extremely careful psychological manipulation and precisely calculated emotional pressure that would gradually increase Hoffman's psychological discomfort and moral distress while simultaneously providing face-saving opportunities for him to end his research voluntarily without completely destroying his professional identity or triggering a more severe psychological break. The approach carried significant risks, as miscalculated psychological pressure might cause Hoffman to escalate his experimental procedures to more dangerous levels, trigger a complete psychological breakdown that could result in violence against his subjects, or create psychological instability that would make him completely unpredictable and potentially more dangerous to both hostages and tactical personnel. As evening approached and natural lighting began to fade, Hoffman implemented what he described as Phase 3 of his comprehensive research protocol, which involved what he termed systematic psychological isolation and customized trauma induction, specifically designed to study individual stress responses, psychological breakdown patterns, and mental resilience limits without the moderating psychological support and emotional stability provided by group dynamics and social interaction. Phase 3 involved systematically separating all subjects into individual research chambers where they could be monitored separately while being subjected to highly customized psychological manipulation protocols, trauma induction techniques, and stress procedures specifically designed based on detailed psychological profiles, personal backgrounds, individual fears, and specific psychological vulnerabilities that Hoffman had identified through his extensive research and psychological assessment of each subject. Phase 3 provides absolutely unprecedented opportunities to study individual differences in psychological resilience, stress adaptation mechanisms, and breakdown patterns under controlled conditions, Hoffman reported during his evening communication session, his voice maintaining the same disturbing clinical detachment despite implementing what amounted to systematic psychological torture of 11 innocent human beings. Each subject is now receiving individually customized psychological pressure protocols, specifically designed based on their comprehensive psychological profile, personal history, educational background, military experience, and identified psychological vulnerabilities. This allows us to examine precisely how individual characteristics, background experiences, and psychological preparation influence stress responses, behavioral adaptation, and mental breakdown patterns under genuine, life-threatening conditions. Hoffman's implementation of Phase 3 revealed the full scope of his psychological manipulation capabilities and his complete willingness to exploit the most personal and private information about his subjects to maximize psychological trauma and mental suffering. The research subjects had provided detailed personal and psychological information during their initial volunteer screening processes, including fears, anxieties, traumatic experiences, family relationships, and psychological vulnerabilities. And Hoffman was now systematically using all of that confidential information to design individualized psychological torture protocols specifically tailored to each person's deepest fears, most painful memories, and greatest psychological weaknesses. Subject Coleman, the graduate student who had volunteered for what she believed was routine memory research, was placed in a completely darkened chamber with intermittent audio recordings of her own voice discussing her deepest personal fears, family trauma, and psychological anxieties that had been secretly recorded during her initial research intake sessions. Hoffman was using Coleman's own words, fears, and emotional vulnerabilities against her, creating a psychological torture environment where she was forced to confront her most painful memories and deepest anxieties while completely isolated and terrified for her life. Subject Bradley, the military veteran who had volunteered for what he thought was legitimate PTSD research, was being subjected to carefully orchestrated audio stimuli specifically designed to trigger severe trauma responses related to his military service and combat experiences, including realistic recordings of explosions, gunfire, radio communications, and battlefield sounds that Hoffman had obtained from Bradley's confidential therapy sessions and medical records. Hoffman was deliberately attempting to activate and amplify Bradley's post-traumatic stress symptoms and combat-related psychological trauma to study how PTSD symptoms manifested and evolved under genuine, life-threatening conditions that exceeded typical military combat stress. The systematic psychological torture that Hoffman was implementing under the elaborate pretense of legitimate scientific research created an absolutely critical tactical situation that demanded immediate intervention regardless of the significant risks associated with assault operations and tactical complications. Commander Mitchell's assessment indicated that waiting for psychological negotiation to succeed, or for Hoffman to exhaust himself, would almost certainly result in permanent psychological trauma, lasting mental damage, or complete psychological breaks in the hostage subjects that could exceed the physical risks associated with tactical intervention and rescue operations. However, Hoffman's sophisticated preparation and comprehensive control of the facility's advanced systems continued to present overwhelming tactical challenges that defied standard SWAT protocols and operational procedures. The research chambers had been specifically designed to contain human subjects safely during psychological experiments, which meant they included structural reinforcements, blast-resistant materials, and environmental isolation systems that would severely complicate tactical entry procedures and potentially neutralize conventional breaching techniques. More critically, Hoffman had demonstrated unprecedented ability to monitor law enforcement communications, tactical positioning, and operational planning through the facility's comprehensive surveillance network, which meant that traditional SWAT approaches would likely be anticipated, countered, or used against tactical personnel through environmental manipulation and psychological warfare techniques that no SWAT team had ever encountered or trained to combat. The tactical breakthrough came from an unexpected source when Dr. Linda Morrison, the research psychologist who had made the initial emergency call and escaped during Hoffman's takeover, volunteered to serve as a technical consultant to help the tactical team understand the facility's sophisticated research equipment, environmental control systems, and the specific psychological manipulation techniques that Hoffman was using against his subjects. Dr. Morrison's expertise in the facility's advanced systems and her intimate knowledge of Hoffman's research background, psychological methodology, and professional obsessions provided crucial tactical intelligence that had not been available through other sources and could potentially be exploited to create tactical advantages that might overcome Hoffman's defensive preparations. Hoffman's entire approach to psychology and research has always been based on environmental control and systematic manipulation of sensory input, Dr. Morrison explained during the critical evening tactical briefing, her voice still shaking from the trauma of witnessing Hoffman's psychological transformation and violent takeover of the research facility. He believes absolutely that human consciousness, behavioral responses, and psychological states can be predicted and controlled through precise manipulation of environmental variables, sensory input, and systematic application of psychological pressure techniques. Dr. Morrison's insight suggested that Hoffman's psychological stability and control of the situation might depend entirely on his ability to maintain absolute environmental control and predictable variables within his experimental protocols. If Hoffman's psychological framework required controlling every aspect of his research environment, then introducing unpredictable variables or disrupting his environmental control systems might create sufficient psychological pressure and instability to motivate him to surrender voluntarily, or create tactical opportunities for successful rescue operations. Hoffman needs to believe that he's controlling every variable in his research environment, and that his experimental protocols are proceeding according to his scientific methodology. Dr. Morrison continued, her psychological insights proving invaluable for tactical planning. If we can introduce environmental variables that he can't control, predict, or incorporate into his research framework, it might undermine his psychological confidence and force him to recognize that his experimental situation has devolved beyond his ability to maintain scientific control. Dr. Morrison's analysis suggested that Hoffman's elaborate psychological defense system might include specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited through environmental manipulation techniques similar to those he was using against his subjects, but applied in ways that would disrupt his sense of scientific control rather than supporting his research objectives. The tactical plan that emerged from this psychological insight involved a carefully coordinated approach that would systematically undermine Hoffman's environmental control while simultaneously creating tactical opportunities for dynamic entry and hostage rescue. The plan required precise timing, advanced technical expertise, and unprecedented coordination between psychological warfare specialists and tactical assault teams. Commander Mitchell's operational plan called for a three-phase approach that would begin with systematic disruption of Hoffman's environmental control systems, followed by coordinated psychological pressure designed to destabilize his research framework, and culminating in simultaneous tactical assaults on multiple research chambers, while Hoffman was psychologically compromised and unable to effectively coordinate defensive measures or retaliate against hostages. Phase 1 would involve the Seattle Metro's technical specialists gaining covert access to the building's main environmental control systems through service tunnels and maintenance areas that Hoffman had not secured during his takeover of the fourth floor. Technical teams would systematically disable Hoffman's ability to control lighting, temperature, atmospheric pressure, and sound systems throughout the research chambers, creating environmental chaos that would disrupt his experimental protocols while providing tactical cover for assault preparations. Phase 2 would implement coordinated psychological warfare techniques designed specifically to exploit Hoffman's psychological vulnerabilities and defensive mechanisms. Dr. Richardson would engage Hoffman in communications designed to force him to confront the human reality of his subjects, while technical teams introduced random environmental disruptions that would prevent him from maintaining the controlled conditions essential to his research methodology and psychological stability. Phase 3 would launch simultaneous tactical assaults on all occupied research chambers using explosive breaching techniques, flashbang devices, and coordinated entry procedures designed to overwhelm Hoffman's defensive capabilities while he was psychologically destabilized and unable to maintain situational awareness or coordinate effective resistance against multiple tactical teams. However, as tactical teams began implementing Phase 1 of the operational plan, they encountered their first indication that Hoffman's preparation and psychological manipulation capabilities extended far beyond what intelligence gathering had revealed. When technical specialists attempted to access the building's environmental control systems through maintenance tunnels, they discovered that Hoffman had somehow anticipated this approach and had installed sophisticated detection systems and defensive measures throughout the building's service areas. Officer James Anderson, leading the technical infiltration team, reported through encrypted communications that the maintenance areas contained motion sensors, automated alert systems, and what appeared to be psychological manipulation equipment similar to that used in the research chambers. Commander, we're encountering resistance that suggests Hoffman has been preparing for exactly this type of tactical approach, Anderson reported. The service tunnels contain equipment that's affecting our team's psychological state and operational effectiveness. Anderson's report included disturbing details about environmental manipulations that were creating disorientation, anxiety, and difficulty concentrating among technical personnel attempting to access control systems. The equipment appeared designed to create subtle psychological pressure that would compromise tactical effectiveness without causing obvious physical symptoms or immediate recognition of the manipulation. We're experiencing difficulty maintaining focus, increased anxiety levels, and what feels like mild paranoia, Anderson continued in his report. The effects are subtle but cumulative, and they're specifically targeting the psychological factors essential for technical precision and tactical coordination. Hoffman has somehow weaponized the building's environmental systems against law enforcement personnel. The realization that Hoffman had extended his psychological manipulation capabilities throughout the building created an entirely new level of tactical complexity that challenged every aspect of the operational plan. Hoffman had not simply fortified the fourth-floor research areas, he had transformed the entire building into a comprehensive psychological warfare environment designed to compromise law enforcement effectiveness while protecting his research activities. Commander Mitchell was forced to completely reassess the tactical situation and develop new operational approaches that accounted for Hoffman's ability to psychologically manipulate law enforcement personnel throughout the building. Traditional SWAT tactics assumed that tactical teams could maintain psychological stability and operational effectiveness while conducting rescue operations. But Hoffman had created an environment where these fundamental assumptions no longer applied. The psychological warfare capabilities that Hoffman had deployed against tactical personnel became more apparent as evening progressed into night. Officers conducting perimeter security and surveillance operations began reporting subtle psychological effects, including increased anxiety, difficulty concentrating, mild paranoia, and disturbing intrusive thoughts that seemed inconsistent with their normal psychological profiles and mental stability. Sergeant Thomas Wilson, coordinating tactical positioning around the building's perimeter, reported through secure communications that his personnel were experiencing what he described as systematic psychological pressure that seems designed to create doubt, anxiety, and operational hesitation. Wilson noted that the effects were subtle enough that officers might not recognize them as external manipulation, but significant enough to compromise tactical decision-making and operational effectiveness. The effects appeared designed to create psychological vulnerabilities that would compromise tactical operations without causing obvious symptoms that would alert personnel to external manipulation, Wilson explained during his status report. Officers are reporting decreased confidence, increased second-guessing of tactical decisions, and what appears to be artificially induced anxiety about operational safety and effectiveness. Dr. Richardson's analysis of the reported symptoms confirmed that Hoffman had somehow extended his psychological manipulation capabilities beyond the research chambers to affect law enforcement personnel throughout the operational area. The psychological effects matched patterns consistent with sophisticated environmental manipulation techniques that could influence mood, anxiety levels, and cognitive function through subtle changes in lighting, sound frequencies, atmospheric pressure, and possibly other environmental variables. Hoffman has essentially turned the entire building and surrounding area into a comprehensive psychological research laboratory, Dr. Richardson explained to Commander Mitchell during an emergency tactical briefing. He's not just conducting experiments on his hostage subjects, he's studying law enforcement response patterns and testing psychological manipulation techniques on our tactical personnel as part of his research protocols. The disturbing realization that the tactical team was unknowingly participating in Hoffman's psychological experiments while attempting to rescue his hostages created an unprecedented operational challenge that had never been encountered in American law enforcement history. Hoffman was simultaneously conducting psychological torture on his hostage subjects while using law enforcement response as an additional component of his research, studying tactical personnel psychological responses to environmental manipulation and operational stress. This revelation forced Commander Mitchell to acknowledge that traditional tactical approaches were not only ineffective, but were actively supporting Hoffman's research objectives by providing him with additional experimental subjects and data regarding law enforcement psychological responses under extreme operational conditions. As night deepened and tactical operations entered their 8th hour, Hoffman's communications with the SWAT team revealed that he was indeed studying law enforcement psychological responses as an integral component of his expanded research protocols. Rather than simply monitoring tactical activities for defensive purposes, Hoffman was systematically documenting tactical team responses, decision-making patterns, and psychological adaptation mechanisms as primary research data. The law enforcement response has provided absolutely unprecedented opportunities to study authority psychology, tactical decision-making under pressure, and institutional behavioral patterns, Hoffman reported during his evening communication session, his clinical detachment extending to include tactical personnel as additional research subjects. I'm documenting how specialized law enforcement training affects stress responses, decision-making processes, and psychological adaptation when confronted with unpredictable variables and environmental manipulation techniques. Hoffman's revelation that he was studying tactical personnel as experimental subjects while they attempted to rescue his hostages created a psychological warfare scenario unlike anything encountered in modern law enforcement history. The SWAT team was simultaneously conducting rescue operations while unknowingly serving as research subjects in psychological experiments designed to test their operational effectiveness under systematic environmental manipulation. Tactical personnel are demonstrating fascinating resistance to environmental psychological manipulation compared to civilian populations. Hoffman continued in his research observations. Specialized training appears to provide significant psychological resilience, but extended exposure to subtle environmental manipulation is beginning to produce measurable effects on decision-making, risk assessment, and operational coordination that could provide valuable insights into law enforcement psychological vulnerabilities. The tactical situation had evolved into a complex psychological chess game where Hoffman was systematically studying both hostage responses and law enforcement responses, while using sophisticated environmental manipulation to influence both groups according to his research objectives. Traditional tactical approaches that relied on predictable suspect behavior and environmental conditions were completely inadequate for confronting an adversary who possessed advanced psychological warfare capabilities and was actively studying tactical responses to improve his manipulation techniques. Commander Mitchell made the unprecedented decision to withdraw all personnel from the building and establish an extended perimeter while developing completely new tactical approaches that accounted for Hoffman's psychological manipulation capabilities. The decision represented the first time in Seattle Metro SWAT history that a tactical team had been forced to withdraw due to psychological warfare rather than physical threats or tactical disadvantages. We're dealing with an adversary who possesses psychological warfare capabilities that our training and protocols were never designed to counter, Commander Mitchell explained to department administrators during the emergency briefing. Hoffman is using advanced psychological manipulation techniques against both hostages and tactical personnel, and traditional approaches are not only ineffective, but are actively supporting his research objectives by providing him with additional experimental subjects. The withdrawal allowed tactical planners to develop new approaches that would minimize psychological manipulation exposure, while still maintaining operational effectiveness. However, the extended delay also provided Hoffman with additional time to escalate his psychological torture of hostage subjects and gather more comprehensive research data from their extended suffering. As tactical teams regrouped and developed new operational approaches, Hoffman implemented what he described as Phase 4 of his research protocol, which involved systematic psychological breakdown procedures designed to test the absolute limits of human psychological endurance, while documenting the complete process of mental collapse under extreme conditions. Phase 4 included complete sensory isolation for all subjects, systematic activation of individuals' psychological traumas and phobias, introduction of hallucinogenic compounds through the chamber's atmospheric systems, and what Hoffman described as terminal psychological stress protocols, designed to document the complete psychological destruction of human consciousness under controlled conditions. Phase 4 represents the culmination of decades of psychological research, Hoffman announced during his midnight communication session. We're now observing the complete breakdown of human psychological defense mechanisms and documenting the precise process by which consciousness dissolves under systematic psychological pressure. This represents scientific advancement that will revolutionize our understanding of human psychology and mental resilience. Hoffman's implementation of Phase 4 created an absolutely critical emergency situation that demanded immediate tactical intervention regardless of psychological manipulation risks or operational complications. The hostage subjects were being subjected to systematic psychological destruction that would result in permanent mental damage, complete psychological breaks, or, potentially, manipulation capabilities included sophisticated behavioral prediction, and tactical response analysis that allowed him to anticipate and counter law enforcement tactical approaches with disturbing accuracy. The final phase of the operation would test every aspect of SWAT training, psychological resilience, and tactical innovation as Commander Mitchell's team attempted to rescue 11 hostage subjects from systematic psychological torture, while confronting an adversary who possessed unprecedented psychological warfare capabilities and was actively using law enforcement response as experimental data for his research into human psychological manipulation and control. The tactical assault began at 03:47 hours on September 9th, with synchronized explosive breaches of all occupied research chambers, while Hoffman was theoretically distracted by simultaneous environmental system failures that technical teams had finally managed to implement despite his defensive countermeasures. Officer Rachel Stevens led the primary assault team into the central research chamber, where intelligence indicated Hoffman was personally conducting the most extreme psychological experiments. Stevens's team encountered immediate resistance in the form of sophisticated psychological warfare techniques that challenged their ability to maintain tactical effectiveness while processing the horrific evidence of systematic psychological torture they discovered throughout the research facility. The research chambers contained evidence of psychological experiments that exceeded anything encountered in law enforcement history, including systematic torture protocols that had been conducted with clinical precision and documented with academic thoroughness. The hostage subjects were found in various states of psychological collapse, with several requiring immediate emergency medical and psychological intervention to prevent permanent mental damage. Hoffman himself was discovered in the facility's central control room, surrounded by comprehensive documentation of his psychological experiments and behavioral observations of both hostage subjects and law enforcement personnel. His psychological state at the time of arrest suggested complete dissociation from the reality of his actions, with continued focus on research methodology and data analysis, even while being taken into custody by tactical personnel. The Mind Bridge Institute operation resulted in the rescue of all 11 hostage subjects, though several required extended psychological treatment and rehabilitation to address the systematic trauma they had endured during Hoffman's experiments. The operation also led to fundamental changes in SWAT training and tactics to address the possibility of psychological warfare techniques being used against law enforcement personnel during tactical operations. Hoffman was ultimately convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, assault, psychological torture, and conducting unauthorized human experimentation. His comprehensive documentation of the psychological experiments provided crucial evidence for prosecution, while also serving as a disturbing testament to the systematic nature of his psychological warfare capabilities. The case led to significant changes in oversight of psychological research facilities and new protocols for law enforcement response to situations involving individuals with advanced psychological warfare training and capabilities. The Mind Bridge Institute operation stands as a landmark case in tactical law enforcement, demonstrating the need for comprehensive preparation for psychological threats that extend far beyond traditional physical dangers encountered during tactical operations. For Commander Mitchell and his tactical team, the operation provided sobering insights into the psychological vulnerabilities of law enforcement personnel and the need for specialized training and equipment to counter advanced psychological warfare techniques. The case fundamentally changed how tactical teams approach operations involving psychologically sophisticated adversaries and led to development of new protective measures and tactical approaches designed to maintain operational effectiveness under psychological manipulation conditions. The 17-hour operation at the Mind Bridge Institute ultimately demonstrated that modern tactical law enforcement must be prepared to confront not only physical threats, but also sophisticated psychological warfare capabilities that can compromise tactical effectiveness and operational success through systematic manipulation of personnel psychology and decision-making processes. The case serves as a crucial reminder that the most dangerous adversaries may be those who understand human psychology well enough to weaponize it against law enforcement personnel, while conducting systematic psychological destruction of innocent victims under the guise of scientific research. The radio crackled to life at 2:17 a.m. on Thursday, November 12, 2021, shattering the quiet night shift at the Denver Metro SWAT headquarters with an urgency that immediately set every operator on high alert. What began as a routine domestic disturbance call in the industrial Riverside district would rapidly escalate into one of the most technically complex and psychologically devastating explosive device situations in modern American tactical law enforcement history. A nightmare scenario that would push Denver's elite SWAT operators to their absolute limits while confronting an adversary whose expertise in improvised explosive devices matched their own tactical capabilities. SWAT team leader Captain Nicholas Thompson had been commanding Denver Metro's Tactical Operations Unit for 6 years when the emergency dispatch pierced the pre-dawn silence. The 38-year-old former Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist had built his reputation through methodical precision and unshakable calm during the most dangerous tactical situations, including multiple incidents involving sophisticated improvised explosive devices, armed barricaded subjects, and complex multi-location operations that attested every aspect of his team's technical expertise and psychological resilience under extreme pressure. Thompson's 8-member tactical unit represented the pinnacle of specialized law enforcement training, with each operator selected through rigorous evaluation processes that combined advanced tactical skills, explosive ordnance expertise, crisis psychology training, and the mental fortitude required to maintain operational effectiveness during prolonged high-stress confrontations with heavily armed and potentially unstable subjects who posed extreme threats to public safety and officer welfare. The team's explosive ordnance disposal specialist, Technical Sergeant Brian Williams, brought 12 years of military EOD experience and specialized civilian training in improvised explosive device identification, disarmament procedures, and blast effect analysis. Williams had served 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan, where he had successfully neutralized over 200 improvised explosive devices, earning multiple commendations for technical expertise and courage under fire that made him invaluable during tactical operations involving explosive threats. Sergeant Lisa Patterson served as the unit's tactical coordinator and second-in-command, responsible for seamless integration of explosive ordnance procedures with dynamic tactical operations, perimeter security, and evacuation protocols. Patterson's 14 years of SWAT experience included specialized training in building assault techniques, hostage rescue procedures, and the complex timing required to coordinate explosive ordnance disposal with tactical movement and civilian protection during multi-phase operations. Officer Mark Rodriguez functioned as the team's intelligence analyst and behavioral assessment specialist, gathering critical information about subjects, analyzing threat patterns, and providing psychological insights that informed both tactical planning and negotiation strategies. Rodriguez's background in criminal psychology and explosive device forensics made him essential for understanding the motivations and capabilities of subjects who combined mental instability with technical expertise in weapons and explosives. The initial emergency call had been reported by neighbors in the Riverside Industrial District, who described hearing explosions, gunshots, and a man screaming threats about bringing down the whole system from inside a converted warehouse that served as both residence and workshop for 43-year-old Timothy Brennan, a former military explosive ordnance disposal technician who had been experiencing increasing psychological instability since his discharge from the Army 18 months earlier. According to police records that would be crucial for tactical planning, Brennan had been arrested twice in recent months for making threats against government facilities, had been reported by concerned neighbors for conducting suspicious activities involving chemical purchases and loud noises from his workshop, and had recently been terminated from his job at a demolition company following confrontations with supervisors about safety protocols and his increasingly erratic behavior. The converted warehouse at 847 Industrial Boulevard occupied a full city block in Denver's industrial district. A massive concrete and steel structure that had been legally purchased by Brennan and modified extensively to serve as both living quarters and what he described to neighbors as a security consulting workshop, where he developed protective devices and security systems for private clients. Building permits and inspection records revealed that Brennan had made extensive modifications to the warehouse structure, including reinforced walls, blast-resistant windows, multiple redundant power systems, and what appeared to be sophisticated security and monitoring equipment throughout the facility. More concerning were recent purchases of industrial chemicals, electronic components, and mechanical materials that could potentially be used for improvised explosive device construction. Captain Thompson and his tactical team arrived at the Riverside warehouse at 2:43 a.m. to discover a situation far more complex and dangerous than initial reports had indicated. Rather than a simple domestic disturbance or mental health crisis, intelligence gathering revealed that Brennan had transformed his warehouse into a sophisticated fortress equipped with advanced security systems, multiple defensive positions, and what appeared to be an extensive collection of improvised explosive devices positioned throughout the facility. The warehouse structure presented immediate tactical challenges due to its massive size, reinforced construction, limited access points, and Brennan's extensive modifications that had created multiple defensive layers and potential kill zones for anyone attempting to enter the facility. Security camera footage from neighboring businesses showed Brennan moving freely throughout the warehouse while carrying what appeared to be explosive devices and weapons, suggesting that he had been preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. More alarming was intelligence provided by Brennan's former colleagues at the demolition company, who reported that his technical expertise in explosive devices was exceptional, and that he had been experimenting with advanced, improvised explosive device designs that incorporated military-grade components with commercial explosives in ways that could create devastating blast effects far beyond typical homemade explosive devices. Brennan understands explosive ordnance better than most military EOD specialists, explained James Mitchell, Brennan's former supervisor at Rocky Mountain Demolition. He's been working with explosives for over 15 years, including combat experience and specialized training that gave him access to classified techniques and materials. If he's decided to use that knowledge against law enforcement, you're dealing with someone who can create explosive devices that will challenge every aspect of your technical capabilities. The initial tactical reconnaissance revealed that Brennan had established comprehensive surveillance of the warehouse perimeter using closed-circuit cameras, motion sensors, and what appeared to be early warning systems that would alert him to any law enforcement approach or tactical positioning around the facility. More concerning were thermal signatures detected by tactical surveillance that suggested the presence of multiple large explosive devices positioned throughout the warehouse interior. Brennan's first communication with Captain Thompson's tactical team came at 3:18 a.m. through a sophisticated radio system that allowed him to monitor law enforcement communications while broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Rather than typical demands or negotiation attempts, Brennan's initial communication took the form of detailed threats regarding the explosive devices he had positioned throughout the warehouse and surrounding area. I want every law enforcement officer within 5 miles to understand that this entire facility is wired with enough explosives to level 3 city blocks. Brennan's voice emerged through the radio system with disturbing, calm, and technical precision that immediately elevated the threat assessment to critical levels. I've spent 18 months preparing for this moment, and I've created explosive devices that will make Waco look like a firecracker demonstration if anyone attempts to breach this facility or force me to detonate my systems. Brennan's communication revealed extensive technical knowledge and preparation that posed unprecedented challenges for tactical operations. His claims about the explosive devices were supported by thermal imaging that showed heat signatures consistent with large quantities of explosive materials positioned strategically throughout the warehouse structure in ways that would maximize blast effects and structural collapse. The explosive devices are interconnected through redundant detonation systems that will activate automatically if tampered with, if I'm killed or incapacitated, or if law enforcement attempts tactical entry, Brennan continued during his initial communication. I've also positioned secondary devices throughout the surrounding area that will detonate in sequence to maximize casualties among law enforcement personnel and prevent effective tactical response or evacuation procedures. The technical sophistication described in Brennan's threats exceeded anything encountered by Denver Metro SWAT and required immediate consultation with federal explosive ordnance disposal specialists and tactical experts who possessed advanced training in military-grade improvised explosive devices and mass casualty explosive threat assessment. Technical Sergeant Williams' preliminary analysis of Brennan's claims and the thermal signatures detected throughout the warehouse indicated that the explosive threat was genuine and potentially catastrophic. Based on the heat signatures, building modifications, and Brennan's technical background, we're looking at a legitimate weapons of mass destruction scenario, Williams reported to Captain Thompson. If his claims are accurate, we're dealing with explosive devices that could cause casualties and property damage far beyond our capacity to manage with current resources. The realization that Brennan possessed both the technical expertise and psychological instability to create and detonate mass casualty explosive devices created an unprecedented tactical situation that required complete revision of standard SWAT protocols and immediate coordination with federal authorities, bomb disposal specialists, and mass casualty response teams. FBI Special Agent Patricia Davis arrived on scene at 4:32 a.m. with specialized equipment and federal resources designed for managing explosive threats that exceeded local law enforcement capabilities. Davis brought extensive experience with domestic terrorism cases and advanced explosive device scenarios that helped establish threat assessment protocols and tactical approaches appropriate for the scale of explosive danger that Brennan represented. We're dealing with a subject who possesses military-grade explosive ordnance disposal training, combined with 18 months of preparation time and access to both military and commercial explosive materials, Agent Davis explained during the emergency tactical briefing. Brennan's psychological profile suggests paranoid ideation focused on government authority, combined with technical expertise that makes him capable of creating devastating explosive effects that could cause mass casualties throughout this industrial district. Agent Davis's assessment confirmed that traditional tactical approaches would be completely inadequate for managing the explosive threat that Brennan represented. The situation required specialized federal resources, advanced technical equipment, and tactical approaches specifically designed for managing weapons of mass destruction scenarios involving technically sophisticated adversaries with military explosive ordnance training. As morning progressed, Brennan's communications revealed the full scope of his preparation and the systematic nature of his explosive device placement throughout the warehouse and surrounding area. Rather than random placement of improvised explosive devices, Brennan had created a comprehensive defensive system designed to maximize casualties among law enforcement personnel, while preventing tactical entry or effective evacuation of the surrounding area. The primary explosive devices are positioned to create structural collapse that will trap law enforcement personnel inside the facility, while secondary devices positioned throughout the perimeter will detonate in sequence to prevent rescue operations or effective tactical response, Brennan explained during one communication session. I've calculated blast effects, casualty projections, and tactical response limitations to ensure maximum effectiveness of my defensive systems. Brennan's systematic approach to explosive device deployment revealed military-level tactical planning combined with intimate knowledge of law enforcement procedures that allowed him to anticipate and counter standard SWAT tactics through strategic explosive placement and sophisticated detonation protocols that exceeded anything encountered in civilian law enforcement. The technical analysis conducted by federal explosive ordnance specialists confirmed that Brennan's explosive systems represented legitimate weapons of mass destruction that posed catastrophic threats not only to law enforcement personnel but also to civilian populations throughout the surrounding industrial district. The blast effects and structural collapse potential required immediate evacuation of the entire area and deployment of specialized federal resources designed for managing domestic terrorism scenarios. However, evacuation procedures were complicated by Brennan's placement of secondary explosive devices throughout the surrounding area, creating a tactical nightmare where standard evacuation routes and staging areas were potentially compromised by explosive threats that could be remotely detonated to maximize casualties among evacuating personnel and civilians. Brennan has effectively created a kill zone that extends far beyond the warehouse facility, Technical Sergeant Williams reported after analyzing thermal signatures and blast effect calculations. The secondary devices are positioned to create overlapping blast effects that would prevent effective evacuation while channeling law enforcement personnel into predetermined areas where they would be most vulnerable to explosive attack. The sophisticated nature of Brennan's explosive defensive system required development of completely new tactical approaches that had never been attempted in American law enforcement history. Traditional negotiation, containment, and tactical assault procedures were all compromised by explosive threats that exceeded the technical capabilities of standard SWAT operations. As the standoff entered its sixth hour, Brennan began implementing what he described as Phase 2 of his defensive protocol, which involved systematic activation of electronic jamming systems designed to disrupt law enforcement communications, tactical coordination, and explosive ordnance disposal equipment that might be used to counter his explosive devices. Phase 2 will demonstrate the inadequacy of current law enforcement tactical capabilities when confronted with properly prepared defensive systems, Brennan announced through his radio broadcasts. Electronic warfare systems are now active and will systematically disrupt law enforcement technology while maintaining full functionality of my explosive defensive networks. Brennan's activation of electronic jamming systems immediately created catastrophic communication failures throughout the tactical operation, preventing coordination between SWAT teams, federal agents, and explosive ordnance disposal specialists while maintaining Brennan's ability to monitor law enforcement activities and coordinate detonation of his explosive devices. The electronic warfare capabilities that Brennan deployed against law enforcement operations exceeded anything encountered in domestic tactical situations and required immediate deployment of specialized federal counter-electronic warfare equipment and tactical approaches designed for managing technically sophisticated adversaries with advanced electronic capabilities. Officer Mark Rodriguez reported through emergency backup communication systems that standard tactical radio networks, cellular communications, and GPS navigation systems were being systematically jammed, while Brennan maintained full communication capabilities and continued broadcasting threats and tactical analysis of law enforcement positioning and operational planning. Electronic jamming is preventing tactical coordination, while Brennan continues demonstrating complete situational awareness of our positioning and operational capabilities, Rodriguez reported. He's using advanced electronic warfare techniques to create tactical advantages while compromising our ability to coordinate explosive ordnance disposal and evacuation procedures. The combination of weapons-grade explosive devices and military-level electronic warfare capabilities created an unprecedented tactical challenge that pushed federal response capabilities to their absolute limits, while demonstrating the potential for technically trained adversaries to create mass casualty scenarios that exceeded current law enforcement response capabilities. As the situation entered its 8th hour, Brennan implemented Phase 3 of his defensive protocol, which involved systematic psychological warfare designed to create operational hesitation and decision-making paralysis among law enforcement personnel, while maintaining psychological pressure that would eventually force tactical mistakes or premature assault attempts that would trigger his explosive defensive systems. Phase 3 will demonstrate how psychological pressure combined with technical superiority can force law enforcement into tactical decisions that result in maximum casualties, Brennan broadcast through his electronic systems. Psychological analysis indicates that extended standoff situations create decision-making pressure that eventually overcomes tactical discipline and forces premature action that benefits defensive positions. Brennan's systematic psychological warfare included detailed threats regarding the explosive devices, technical analysis of law enforcement tactical limitations, and psychological pressure designed to create urgency and operational stress that would compromise tactical decision-making and potentially force premature assault attempts that would result in catastrophic casualties. The psychological pressure tactics that Brennan employed were sophisticated enough to affect even experienced SWAT operators and federal agents, creating operational stress and decision-making difficulties that threatened to compromise tactical effectiveness and potentially lead to tactical mistakes that could trigger the explosive defensive systems. Captain Thompson recognized that Brennan's combination of explosive threats, electronic warfare, and psychological pressure was systematically degrading law enforcement operational effectiveness while creating conditions that favored detonation of explosive devices and maximum casualties among tactical personnel. We're dealing with an adversary who understands law enforcement psychology and tactical procedures well enough to create systematic pressure that compromises our operational effectiveness, Thompson reported to federal incident commanders. Brennan is using military-level warfare techniques to create tactical advantages that could force us into operational decisions that result in catastrophic casualties. The technical and psychological sophistication that Brennan demonstrated throughout the standoff required development of completely new tactical approaches that combined federal resources, specialized equipment, and innovative operational procedures that had never been tested in real-world tactical situations involving weapons of mass destruction and advanced electronic warfare capabilities. The resolution of the Riverside warehouse standoff required unprecedented coordination between federal agencies, specialized technical experts, and tactical teams using advanced equipment and procedures that pushed the boundaries of current law enforcement capabilities while managing explosive threats that posed catastrophic risks to personnel and civilian populations. The final tactical operation involved simultaneous deployment of advanced electronic counter-warfare systems, robotic explosive ordnance disposal equipment, and coordinated tactical approaches designed to neutralize Brennan's defensive capabilities while minimizing the risk of explosive detonation and mass casualties. Technical Sergeant Williams led the final explosive ordnance disposal operation using remote-controlled robots and advanced detection equipment to systematically identify and neutralize the explosive devices, while federal electronic warfare specialists countered Brennan's jamming systems and restored tactical communications throughout the operational area. The tactical resolution ultimately succeeded in neutralizing the explosive threats and apprehending Brennan without triggering the mass casualty scenario he had prepared. But the operation required resources and capabilities that exceeded standard law enforcement and demonstrated the need for advanced federal response capabilities for managing technically sophisticated domestic terrorism threats. Brennan was found to have constructed over 40 separate explosive devices throughout the warehouse and surrounding area, including several devices that incorporated military-grade explosives and sophisticated detonation systems that could have caused casualties and property damage far beyond anything previously encountered in domestic law enforcement operations. The Riverside warehouse case led to fundamental changes in tactical training, federal resource coordination, and protocols for managing subjects with advanced technical capabilities and access to weapons-grade materials. The case demonstrated the critical need for specialized training and equipment to manage domestic terrorism threats that combine technical expertise with psychological instability and access to advanced materials and equipment. For Captain Thompson and his tactical team, the operation provided sobering insights into the evolving nature of threats facing law enforcement and the need for continuous advancement of tactical capabilities, technical training, and federal coordination to effectively manage increasingly sophisticated adversaries with advanced technical capabilities and destructive potential that exceeds traditional law enforcement response capabilities. The psychological aftermath of the Riverside warehouse operation proved as challenging as the tactical complexities encountered during the 18-hour standoff. Officer Mark Rodriguez, despite his extensive background in criminal psychology and behavioral analysis, found himself struggling to process the systematic nature of Brennan's preparation and the calculated precision with which he had planned mass casualties among law enforcement personnel and civilian populations. What disturbs me most isn't just the technical sophistication of Brennan's explosive systems, Rodriguez explained during mandatory psychological debriefing sessions. It's the realization that he spent 18 months systematically planning to kill as many law enforcement officers as possible while demonstrating complete understanding of our tactical procedures, psychological responses, and operational limitations. He studied us like laboratory specimens while preparing to destroy us. Rodriguez's psychological assessment revealed that Brennan had been conducting surveillance of Denver Metro SWAT operations for over a year, attending public events where tactical teams provided demonstrations, researching tactical procedures through online sources and military publications, and possibly conducting direct observation of actual tactical operations through scanner monitoring and physical surveillance of training facilities. Technical Sergeant Williams faced his own psychological challenges as he processed the technical sophistication of Brennan's explosive devices and the realization that his own military training and experience had been systematically studied and countered by an adversary who possessed comparable technical expertise combined with intimate knowledge of explosive ordnance disposal procedures and limitations. Every technique I used during the final clearance operation had been anticipated by Brennan, Williams reported during his psychological evaluation. He had prepared countermeasures for standard EOD procedures, backup systems that would activate if primary devices were discovered, and secondary explosive systems designed specifically to target explosive ordnance disposal personnel using tactics and equipment he knew we would employ. The comprehensive nature of Brennan's preparation extended beyond explosive devices and electronic warfare, to include detailed psychological profiles of individual SWAT team members that he had somehow compiled through the research into their backgrounds, military service records, and previous tactical operations. Computer evidence seized from the warehouse revealed that Brennan had been studying specific tactical personnel for months, analyzing their decision-making patterns and developing customized psychological pressure techniques designed to exploit individual vulnerabilities. Brennan had files on every member of our tactical team, Captain Thompson discovered during the evidence analysis phase. He knew our military backgrounds, combat experience, family situations, and psychological profiles in enough detail to design specific psychological warfare techniques targeted at individual officers. This wasn't random preparation. It was systematic intelligence gathering focused on destroying our operational effectiveness through personalized psychological manipulation. The evidence revealed that Brennan had been using multiple identity theft techniques and social engineering methods to gather personal information about SWAT team members, their families, and their psychological vulnerabilities. The psychological warfare techniques he employed during the standoff had been customized based on detailed analysis of individual officers' backgrounds and psychological profiles. Sergeant Lisa Patterson discovered that Brennan had somehow obtained information about her military service in Iraq and had specifically designed psychological pressure techniques intended to trigger combat-related stress responses that would compromise her tactical decision-making capabilities during the standoff operation. Brennan knew details about my combat experience that aren't in any public records, Patterson reported during security debriefing sessions. He used specific references to incidents from my military deployment to create psychological pressure designed to activate combat stress responses that would interfere with my tactical coordination responsibilities. The level of personal information he possessed suggests systematic intelligence gathering that may have involved multiple sources. The investigation into Brennan's intelligence gathering methods revealed potential security breaches within Denver Metro's personnel systems and raised serious concerns about the vulnerability of tactical personnel to systematic surveillance and intelligence gathering by technically sophisticated adversaries with advanced research capabilities and extensive preparation time. FBI cybersecurity specialists discovered that Brennan had been using advanced hacking techniques to penetrate law enforcement databases, social media accounts, and personal communication systems to gather intelligence about SWAT team members and their operational procedures. The investigation revealed security vulnerabilities that could be exploited by other technically sophisticated adversaries to compromise tactical operations and personnel safety. Brennan's intelligence-gathering operation was more sophisticated than what we typically encounter from foreign intelligence services, reported FBI cybersecurity specialist agent Sarah Collins. He used multiple advanced techniques to penetrate secure systems and gather comprehensive intelligence about tactical personnel and operational procedures over an extended period without detection by standard security monitoring systems. The cybersecurity investigation revealed that Brennan had potentially compromised the personal security of not only SWAT team members but also their family members, creating ongoing security risks that required comprehensive protective measures and lifestyle modifications for tactical personnel and their dependents. The warehouse facility itself contained evidence of preparation that exceeded anything previously encountered in domestic terrorism investigations. Beyond the sophisticated explosive devices and electronic warfare equipment, investigators discovered comprehensive intelligence files, tactical analysis documents, and preparation materials that suggested Brennan had been planning similar operations targeting multiple law enforcement facilities throughout the Denver metropolitan area. The warehouse was, essentially, a domestic terrorism research and development facility, Agent Davis explained during federal briefings. Brennan had been developing advanced improvised explosive devices, electronic warfare systems, and psychological warfare techniques that he intended to use against multiple law enforcement targets as part of a comprehensive campaign designed to demonstrate the vulnerability of current tactical capabilities to technically sophisticated adversaries. Evidence indicated that the Riverside warehouse operation was intended as a proof of concept demonstration that would be followed by increasingly sophisticated attacks on law enforcement facilities throughout the region. Brennan's planning documents included target analysis for SWAT training facilities, tactical equipment storage locations, and personnel residential areas that suggested a systematic campaign designed to maximize casualties and demonstrate tactical vulnerabilities. The investigation expanded to include analysis of potential associates and support networks that might have assisted Brennan's intelligence gathering and preparation activities. Federal investigators discovered that Brennan had been communicating with individuals in other states who possessed similar technical backgrounds and anti-government ideologies, raising concerns about potential coordinated domestic terrorism activities involving multiple technically trained adversaries. We're investigating potential networks of technically trained individuals who may be sharing intelligence, resources, and tactical analysis focused on attacking law enforcement capabilities, Agent Davis reported. The sophistication of Brennan's operation suggests possible coordination with other individuals who possess comparable technical training and access to advanced materials and equipment. The multi-state investigation revealed communications between Brennan and at least 12 other individuals with military explosive ordnance disposal backgrounds, advanced technical training, and anti-government ideologies that suggested potential for coordinated domestic terrorism activities exceeding anything previously encountered by federal law enforcement agencies. The tactical lessons learned from the Riverside warehouse operation led to fundamental changes in SWAT training, operational security, and federal coordination protocols designed to address the evolving threat posed by technically sophisticated domestic adversaries with advanced capabilities and systematic preparation methods. Training programs now include advanced scenarios involving weapons of mass destruction, electronic warfare, and psychological warfare techniques that challenge traditional tactical approaches and require innovative solutions and specialized equipment that exceeds standard SWAT capabilities. The Riverside warehouse case fundamentally changed how we understand domestic terrorism threats, Captain Thompson explained during tactical training conferences. We can no longer assume that domestic adversaries lack the technical sophistication, preparation capabilities, or systematic approach that we traditionally associated with foreign terrorism threats. Brennan demonstrated that domestic adversaries can possess capabilities that exceed our traditional response methods. The case led to increased federal funding for advanced tactical equipment, specialized training programs, and coordination protocols between local SWAT teams and federal agencies with advanced technical capabilities required for managing weapons of mass destruction scenarios and electronic warfare threats. Personal security protocols for tactical personnel were comprehensively revised to address the vulnerability to systematic surveillance and intelligence gathering, demonstrated by Brennan's operation. SWAT team members now receive specialized training in operational security, personal information protection, and counter-surveillance techniques designed to prevent systematic intelligence gathering by technically sophisticated adversaries. Every tactical operator now understands that their personal information, family details, and operational patterns are potential intelligence targets for adversaries who possess advanced technical capabilities and extensive preparation time, Sergeant Patterson explained during security training sessions. We've had to fundamentally change how we approach personal security and operational security to address threats that we never anticipated during traditional law enforcement operations. The psychological impact on tactical personnel and their families extended far beyond the immediate operation. The realization that systematic intelligence gathering and personal surveillance had been conducted over extended periods created lasting concerns about ongoing security risks and the potential for future targeted attacks against tactical personnel and their dependents. Family members of SWAT team members required security briefings and protective measures to address potential ongoing threats from Brennan's associates and similar technically sophisticated adversaries who might attempt to exploit personal information and family vulnerabilities to compromise tactical operations or target law enforcement personnel. The Riverside warehouse case ultimately demonstrated that modern domestic terrorism threats can exceed the technical sophistication and systematic preparation previously associated with foreign terrorism, while combining advanced technical capabilities with intimate knowledge of American law enforcement procedures and vulnerabilities that create unprecedented challenges for tactical response capabilities. The case serves as a watershed moment in American tactical law enforcement, marking the transition from traditional SWAT operations focused on conventional criminal threats to advanced federal coordination required for managing domestic terrorism scenarios involving weapons of mass destruction, electronic warfare, and systematic intelligence gathering capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about domestic security and law enforcement tactical superiority. For the Denver Metro SWAT team, the Riverside warehouse operation represents a permanent change in operational perspective and tactical preparation. The realization that domestic adversaries can possess technical capabilities and systematic preparation that exceed traditional law enforcement response methods has led to comprehensive changes in training, equipment, and operational approaches that will influence tactical law enforcement for decades to come. The case continues to influence federal policy regarding domestic terrorism preparedness, tactical training requirements, and the need for advanced coordination between local law enforcement and federal agencies with specialized capabilities for managing technically sophisticated threats that exceed traditional SWAT operational parameters. As Captain Thompson noted in his final assessment report, the Riverside warehouse case taught us that the line between domestic criminal threats and domestic terrorism has been permanently erased. We must now prepare for adversaries who possess military-level technical capabilities, systematic intelligence gathering methods, and preparation capabilities that rival foreign terrorism threats, while operating within our own communities with intimate knowledge of our procedures, limitations, and vulnerabilities. The legacy of Timothy Brennan and the Riverside warehouse operation continues to shape tactical law enforcement training and preparedness as agencies across the nation work to develop capabilities adequate for managing increasingly sophisticated domestic terrorism threats that combine advanced technical knowledge with systematic preparation and intimate understanding of American law enforcement vulnerabilities and operational limitations.